Thank you. It's 5 p.m. everyone. Welcome to the regular meeting of Lacombe City Council for Monday, August the 10th. We'll call the meeting to order. We've got an agenda in front of you. Anybody have any additions or corrections, changes, or questions? If not, we could use a motion. Councillor Golickson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I also move that we accept the agenda as presented.
Thank you. Anyone else? All those in favor? Thank you. We have no public hearings this evening, so we will move right down into requests for decision. Item 5.1, the request for proposal results for the service level review. Director Pichet, could you take us through this item, please?
Certainly. Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So before council this evening is a request for proposal to award the service level review RFP. As part of council's strategic plan, a service level review for the entire organization was requested to be completed. The main priorities for this review is to evaluate the existing service levels, create an inventory of services, review current plans and reports to ensure that existing levels are meeting expectations, tie our service levels into the asset management program, and identify any gaps or redundancies in the service level areas. An RFP was created and posted on the Alberta Purchasing Connection and the city's website, and the city had 5 responses. All of the responses provided a high-level review of the city's services. However, MNP offered to do a deeper dive into the areas that may show some inefficiencies or some gaps. MNP's methodology is that it's a 4-phased approach. The first phase starts out by going over the goals and project and discussing with the team members involved the processes that'll happen, and basically do a kickoff meeting as what most projects start out with. Phase 2, it is a high-level review of the organization, and this is where they develop a service level inventory, and if it meets and sees to meet that it, sees to meet the expectations based on documents such as the citizen satisfaction survey and any benchmarks from comparable municipalities and our own internal documents. At the end of this phase, a preliminary report will be presented to the CLT team, and it will be determined which service areas or departments that may need a high impact focus review. And this will be done in phase 3. And so what the high impact focus review is where it's more of a deep dive into these agreed upon areas that require more attention. The MNP will gather more detailed information about each area being reviewed, and will conduct interviews with staff and obtain specific information, and will compile another report with more recommendations. Following that report, a workshop will be conducted with the senior management as well as the staff from whatever focus area is being discussed, and they'll discuss any impact analysis and implementation considerations, and they'll provide all sorts of feedback. Finally, phase 4 is the final report, and that will include any proposed improvements, recommendations, and a roadmap to help service the focus areas that were done in the high impact focus review. So the budget for this project is set at $80,000, and MNP came in at $79,500. Administration is requesting that council approves the recommendation to award MNP as the contractor to perform the service level review at a maximum value of $79,500. At this time, if there are any questions, I am happy to take them.
Thank you, Director Pichet. Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So what are the long-term intentions, or what are the expected results or benefits of this within the whole organization? Because I think the timing of this might be more appropriate another year or so outside of the COVID times. Like, I completely respect our grassroots workers and managers and directors, that some of that feedback can come from the grassroots of every department up to the top. But I see this in these times to be a little difficult right now because of different already structures to accommodate COVID and the other responsibilities of COVID within all of our managers and directors, I think this would be, I don't know, in my opinion, I guess more information. What are the benefits of this? What are the expectations?
Absolutely. So one of the things that has been set out in many terms of council for the past few years is that a service level review is to be completed. It is to just require, it is just to get an inventory of all of our services for each department, and so that we know what is being done by each department. The push for the service level has been done because it was set out by council in the strategic plan. At this point, we're just following through with those requests.
Thanks, Mark.
Councillor Richard, go ahead.
So yeah, because my questions were a little bit too, when was the last one done? And then when is this going to commence and hopefully be finished?
So we haven't ever done one before.
Okay.
The anticipatory time to start would be September. Once this is awarded, it would start immediately. They've given about an 8-month time frame to be completed.
Councillor Conick.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. And these high impact focus areas that you suggest doing in phase 3, how is that determined, or who determines that?
It'll be a decision based on the high level overview. So one of the things in the second phase is that they create what's called service profiles. So with those service profiles, they find out like the number of staff, the types of services that are being offered, if we have the right capacity for people for doing these services. In that, we also then go through any gaps or redundancies that are being done in that second level, and that, or in that second phase, and then from there they'll give us a report, a preliminary report of all that. And what it does, it tells us where we are seeing some of those gaps or those redundancies, and that's the areas that we focus for those high level impacts.
Right, just a follow-up, and so at that point, is that something that will come back to council then, or would Min just kind of carry on with this? Or?
It was initially identified that it would be an admin, but I guess if council would like to see part of that, that would be something that we could allow. Absolutely.
Well, I was just curious. I mean, at that point, I'd like to maybe see what areas I've identified as high impact.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just was
it would definitely be part of the phases that we could put in there. Mm-hmm.
Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I guess it wasn't clear to me, at least, how much of the financial side of things would be looked at when we're doing a service review. Like, is that a part of the consideration as well? I guess I'll start with that question, then I have another one.
Yes, financials were included in the reporting that we would have to provide to the contractor. So they would be seeing all of that.
So I think that's important for, like, especially if the public is looking at the report and they want to know, like, how much, you know, money this department, for example, is, and then, like, what is the service return on that? Because of course, citizens care about their property taxes going in, or they want a service back out of it. And I guess the other question, sort of a follow-up to Councillor Ross's then, is how much of an impact is the COVID situation going to have on doing this job? Like, is it going to have a relatively minor effect, or is it going to like magnify issues because of, you know, as was mentioned, sort of tweaks in personnel, et cetera, et cetera?
This definitely has been a different year for everybody in that regard. I think we'd have to go back further in some of our reporting, what information we're giving the contractor. All of the contractors, no matter who we would have selected, would require information. So I think we're going to have to go back a couple of years so that we can get sort of a baseline of how things are going. And then, yeah, you're right, this will be an exceptional year for that. So moving forward, we could probably have just like in their recommendations and their improvement suggestions and such, where we are now and how it would play out in today's normalcy, I guess.
So just one follow-up then. So I guess what I'm wanting to hear is is administration saying that we should proceed with this at this time? I totally get it, that's one of our priorities, and I still believe strongly in doing it, but I am also concerned that it won't capture what it is that we want to capture. So I guess what I'm wanting to hear from administration is that they do have confidence that, that we should proceed with this at this time, or maybe could be considered to be postponed.
May I defer that to?
Well, I say that's an interesting question, and I think that we will certainly give administration a minute to think about it. I do want to put it out there in the meantime. This was something that they're doing at our direction. I'm not sold that this is necessarily a good time to be doing this. I mean, $80,000 is a significant amount of funds to spend on a study such as this. I did have an opportunity to speak with some other mayors and reeves, and several of them had undertaken service level reviews. And when I posed the question of the advantages and what positive things came out of it and whatnot, the list was extremely short, non-existent in fact. So this is difficult for me to endorse spending these kind of funds. Some of the negative things that come out of it, it's an extremely time-consuming thing for staff, and it's a tumultuous thing. Some of them get the feeling that we're headhunting for places to cut, positions, departments, whatever the case may be. I really don't think that the timing to review this is now for me. Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I think when this council came into place, I think we all had a lot of, I think we're very interested in learning of the process and what's taking place. And this was one area to possibly get a lot of information. And I absolutely agree with yourself. I think in these times, I think our administration has already been tasked with a lot of challenges this year. And I think I'd like to make the motion that we receive this as information and defer it to another year other than 2020.
Councillor Hibbs.
Sorry, but I would like the answer from administration to the question that I asked. Thank you.
Chief Cuddy.
So thank you for thinking of us and asking for our opinion. Definitely, Director Piché is correct. One of the driving reasons, of course, for our work is direction we receive from council. When I look at the things that I was really looking forward as your administrator to get out of this, one of the things was the service level inventory. But it is tough for us to look and say we're going to accurately benchmark our services when Public Works is on a different schedule than they have ever been in the past, or when we're doing bylaw enforcement in a new way than we have in the past. And so I'm somewhat hesitant about that we would get the same value that council was anticipating originally. And then I would also say that I do have some concerns when you look at staff morale, not just at our organization, but across the province right now. This idea of setting up for where to cut or whatever, I think could take hold, and people could really feel disturbed by that for whatever it's worth. And so I guess my recommendation, all things being equal, with council's agreement, we would love to see this actually move a year or two back until we're a little bit more normalized. This being the first time we're ever going to do this, and I would anticipate the only time for the next 10 years at least, you should get the best value you can for the $80,000 that you're going to spend, and I'm not sure you'd get that today.
Thank you for that. So I guess for me, it wasn't a problem that I had with the RFP process, nor with the outcomes from the group that you had discussed. That's not it. It's just, it seems odd to me if we're doing this, the intention of having some sort of benchmark to be having it based on an anomaly of a year. It just seems very odd to me.
I completely understand, not aware either.
I see a hand up here. Councillor Connick.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. No, I concur with the sentiments expressed here, but honestly, I don't think next year's gonna be much different than this year, and it might be a few years before we go down this road. So while I understand the idea of delaying it, we're gonna be delaying it for a few years, I think. 3, 4, 5 years maybe, by the time we figure out the time to do it, but that's my comment.
Anyone else? So the motion that we have before us is to receive this report as information, which for all intents and purposes postpones this until a later date for administration to bring it back before council. I think that's fair to say. Councillor Boucher?
Thanks, Mayor Creasy, but Councillor Ross did add a date to it, did he not?
I just said it further, your,
Oh, okay.
I
I thought
apologize, I
I
didn't
thought it
think I
said
was
next year.
specific unless I can be corrected.
I think that we have Ms. Bellabono on recording or listening to us, so perhaps you could read that motion as initially put forward, please.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. The motion was to receive this report as information and defer to another year.
Very well. Everybody hear that? Anything further on that particular motion? All those in favor? Any opposed? So that was unanimous. Thank you. And next up, Manager Reyes. We've got item 5.2, the budget survey feedback. I'll give you a few moments to get ready, and then the floor will be yours. Councillor, I'll start. Sorry, it's up to you. I think we'll rearrange.
Okay, sorry.
Manager Reyes?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Every year, the city of Lacombe conducts a pre-budget survey for about 3 weeks. In 2020, the survey was conducted from June 29th to July 20th. The survey was advertised in different media, including our local newspaper, the radio, social media, our website, and Lacombe's farmers market. Some highlights of the survey include we included 10 questions this time compared to 9 questions in 2019. The number of responses received was 79, which was down from 2019 when we received 112 responses. The completion rate was higher than in 2019 though, 91% completion rate compared to 71% in 2019. The number of, the time spent answering the questions was 2 minutes compared to 5 minutes and 3 seconds in 2019. And one of our objectives was actually to keep that time under 5 minutes. Now, in regards to the questions that we included, question number 1 had to do with the level of satisfaction for municipal services. And that responded, 85% of the respondents indicated that they were satisfied with the services received from the municipality. That compares to 70% in 2019. Question number 2 had to do with balancing the budget. And basically the question indicated that due to inflation and other factors, costs tend to increase from time to time. And that response that we received for that question was fairly divided between maintaining the tax levels and changing the levels of service, which was 38% of respondents who indicated that, and to cover the excess cost by a combination of increasing taxes and user fees, which was around 36%. Questions 3 to 9 had to do with different services, and the questions had to do with the level of service and funding. Most of the respondents or participants indicated that they would like to maintain the levels of service and funding for all the programs that were listed in the survey. Finally, the last question, question number 10, had to do, gave the opportunity to participants to provide any comments. And these comments have been included as part of the attachment number 2 that council received in the report. Administration would like to thank all participants that took time to complete the survey. And tonight, administration recommends that council accepts this report for information. And if council has any questions, I'm open for any questions at this time.
Thank you, Manager Reyes. Councillor Connor.
Hey, Mayor Creasy. So I'm pleased with the results in terms of the level of satisfaction with service levels and so forth. I just wonder if we're getting any value from doing this when only 80 people apply. It's unfortunate. I mean, that's, get what you get with surveys, but I wonder going forward if this is.
I think it's more important that we focus on the 85% approval rate. No, that's a very valid question. Councillor Conick, it's a pretty difficult thing to expect to extrapolate information from such a small sampling, but fair comment. Chief Gowdy?
So we had a very similar discussion that, well, that's great, 85% of less than 1% of our employer citizens think we're doing a great job. I mean, I guess we, selfishly extended that and said, well, that means at least 99% of residents think we're doing an okay enough job not to go on and complain. But really, the value when you look at the cost of advertising in the paper, advertising on the radio, the time taken to do social media posts and post it on our website, I'm not sure what other advertising mechanisms we can do. We're getting a lot of engagement on this though, and so that is a very good question.
Traditionally, it's a difficult thing to get people engaged in, period. 80 better than 0, but I think if we had a cost per participant, it would flourish. Yeah. Councillor Gullickson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I echo that too, is that when we're at the farmer's market, the majority of the people we just talked to said, well, I'm happy, I'm not gonna fill it out. So I think you're right that the majority of the citizens are happy with the job that the city's doing at this time. And how you get them to participate, I don't know, because we asked numerous people and they said, no, I'm happy, I'm not gonna fill it out. So I think it's a waste of time on a yearly basis. Maybe bi-yearly might be more realistic than yearly, because it's certainly people didn't seem that interested in taking part in it when I asked the question.
Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Yeah, so I guess, that is the big question, is it apathy or is it approval, the people that aren't answering, right? And I think, honestly, it's probably a combination of both. I do find value in the comments, although I do find them disturbing at the same time, because I have to wonder now, perhaps it is just a snapshot of an individual, but it seems like over and over again, people don't understand like the decisions that we're making and why we're making them. And it's frustrating, because it would be easy to have a conversation with somebody that comes at us with, for example, the solid waste review, and really explain why it sort of looks like status quo. It's because a large part of it's out of our hands. We have to lobby the Waste Commission. Well, that's not part of the city of Lacombe. That's, a body that we interact with, but we don't have control over that, right? So I think partially our message is not getting out there, and that's frustrating, because of course people are easy to look at from the outside and go, well, they're making poor financial decisions, they're wasting money, so I gotta wonder if there's another way that we can try and communicate. You're not gonna get everybody, because frankly, some people just couldn't be bothered. They don't care. It's just, whatever, I'll pay my property taxes, as long as I don't have some catastrophic pothole in front of my house, they don't care, right? So, but I guess for me, that's the biggest thing out of this. Would I be heartbroken that we stopped doing the survey? Part of me says no, but it is really important that we still give an opportunity for residents to interact with it. Well, ratepayers in general, but residents to interact with us. And we do that, maybe perhaps through the farmer's market, maybe it isn't in conjunction with the budget survey or something like that, but maybe there's a way that we can reimagine how we communicate budget decisions like prior to it happening and then also after the fact to the general public. Maybe our new communications person can come up with a great idea. Those little videos, for example, that the mayor did with the manager, like talking about the road construction that's happening this year, I think was a phenomenal idea that's new, and I think that actually was quite effective. They weren't they weren't very long, but I think that they were effective. They explained things well. I think people got value out of that. Imagine if we did something like that budget related. Maybe we just talked about a single department or whatever and sort of talked about some of the considerations that council has when they're making decisions as far as awarding projects when you're talking about the capital side or if you're talking about the operating side. I think that would add value to the residents and understanding what's happening at City Hall, and then also therefore allows them to be more engaged with us, because it is actually, I think, rather intimidating for a member of the public to have a discussion about a budget with a member of council or administration, because you're talking about over $40 million. You can't break it down enough to maybe have a really in-depth conversation. I don't know, it's just an idea, but I do challenge administration to perhaps think of a different way that we can do this, something that would bring more value, especially for the residents. It is for them. I think it should be less for us, but more for them. So anyway, long-winded, I apologize, but that's what I do.
It's an interesting thought, Councillor Hibbs. I appreciate that. I mean, given that, in particular, those videos that you mentioned, certainly not because I was on them, probably, but when we're talking 1,500 to 2,000 people that view those, as opposed to 80 people who are willing to do a survey, somewhere in there, perhaps we should try doing a video, not necessarily just myself, but all of council to present some of the budget things. Maybe we'll get a little more feedback like that, maybe an idea. But there has to be a better way, because I think we can all agree that 80 respondents is not really a valuable sample or a good snapshot of our community. And we can think whatever we want from the results that are given, and 85% approval is better than 85% the other way, but let's face it, doesn't take that many people to see results when it's such a small sampling. But anyone else? Councillor Connick?
I was just going to move that we accept the report as information.
Thank you. Anyone else before we vote on that motion before us? All those in favor? Thank you. Measure is, well, we've got you here. Item 5.3, the Calvary Evangelical Free Church request. If you can take us through that item, please.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. On February 14th, 2020, the city mailed out tax assessment notices to all property owners of the city of Lacombe. Shortly after receiving the 2020 assessment notice, the Lacombe Evangelical Church contacted the city, indicating that they were in disagreement with the property assessment notice. Administration contacted our assessors to forward their concern and to get their opinion. And we received information from our assessors indicating that the property was in fact taxable. And the reason for that is that it had been, although it had been rezoned in the prior year in June 2019, the property had still not been amalgamated or joined to the property where the church is. And that's the second step that was needed in order for the property to be tax exempt. Until that is completed, the property continues to qualify for as a taxable property. We communicated that to back to the church, indicating that that's the reason why they were being assessed for taxes. That the rezoning, although the rezoning had been done, the property was not being used for religious purposes, which is one of the requirements that the MTA has. In order for the property to qualify for tax exemption, it needed to be used for that and not be held as a land used for green space, which is the case in this instance. Therefore, they ended up getting a tax notice, and the total taxes for the property are 1,297, and that includes the non-municipal portion, which is around 25% of that. That's the education and Lacombe association, foundation, sorry, part of the taxes. And finally, I would like to indicate that administration's recommendation tonight is for council to accept this report as information, which means that council will be declining the request from Lacombe Evangelical Free Church for a tax exemption, I guess. And I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Manager Reyes. Councilor Rossman, you had your hand up first.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'll just make a recommendation the council accepts this report as information.
Motion, thank you. Councilor Hibbs.
Yes, thank you. So just one little note, just because it bothers me. At the very bottom of the very first page of the memo, it says i.e. a parish. Actually, it's a parsonage, but just those little things that anyways. The question that I had is, you were explaining how the church was informed that the property, although it was rezoned, did not qualify for the tax-free exemption. Was that communicated to them at the time of the rezoning, that they were clearly understood that the property required consolidation to have that tax-free status? Because that I don't think was clear in the memo, unless I misunderstood it, that they were informed of that at the time when they challenged the assessment. But were they at the time of the rezoning explained to them that you must go through the next step to get that tax-free status?
So I guess that kind of just depends on how you read the second page, doesn't it? Because I wondered that myself. When you state that they were also advised that rezoning does not automatically make the property tax exempt, has in fact that rezoning been completed now? Because it was not at the time of writing, correct?
The rezoning part had been completed, yes, it was completed last year. The part that is not done yet is the consolidation of the two properties. So to my knowledge, the process is happening at the time. I'm not sure if it's been completed, but I know it's happening in 2020. It didn't happen in 2019. And as of December 31st, 2019, the two properties were not consolidated yet.
Okay, and then specifically to Councillor Hibbs' question then, at the initial contact, was it clearly conveyed that in order to be tax exempt, that there was an entire process that had to have been gone through? It was a two-part thing.
I do not have that information, to be honest, but I do know that in the report that was brought to council, when the rezoning was happening, it was indicated there that the rezoning was being done in order to facilitate the consolidation of the two lots. And it mentioned in the memo a few times, which makes me think that some discussion would have been done with the property owner in regard to the consolidation of the two properties.
Thank you. Chief Gowdy?
So I doubt it's as clear cut as you want to know, and we're not really able to say, oh yes, definitely it was pointed out or it wasn't. It obviously was not clear to Mr. Solomons, or we would, I'm sure he didn't willfully ignore the advice. I imagine what happened was that we said that Mr. Solomons came in, said, hey, we're no longer using it as a parsonage, and we want to consolidate it with the church. We want to make it just part of the church. And if you're not familiar with land use planning and rezoning and consolidation, you say, well, I just want to rezone it. And we would say, well, you know, that you also have to consolidate, and you have to do one before the other. I think in a lot of people's minds, it would understandably sound like, well, some city process, and then it'll all be taken care of and done. And so I unfortunately cannot give a definitive answer here. I'm sure we never said, I'm sure that our staff never said, it will be tax exempt once the rezoning is complete. And probably if you sat there and knew what was being discussed, you know, listening in, you would probably say, oh yeah, they mentioned it there. It's not till consolidation, but whether or not that actually was understood and received by the applicant, or whether we stopped to make sure they did, I don't know. All I would say is it obviously wasn't made clear enough if it was intended to be made clear, because I would not be here otherwise. However, it is up to applicants to know the implications and research the implications of the land use steps they're taking. And so there is some responsibility there as well to say, well, I'm doing this, to say to the staff, I'm doing this to avoid, you know, to remove the tax burden on this property. Is this going to do that? And clearly that wouldn't happen either, because certainly we would have said no, it doesn't.
Councilor Gibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Yeah, so, I mean, that is my greatest concern here, because exactly, most people aren't, you know, very knowledgeable about how zoning goes. They don't know the ins and outs. The land use bylaw is a thick binder worth of material to plow through, and I honestly feel that potentially the city maybe didn't do as good a job here as they could have done to follow up with, you know, them understanding that there was a next step. Like I am really quite concerned about this, and I realize that there is a motion on the floor already to accept this as information. I would like council to maybe just pause for a moment and consider the idea that we probably have a little bit of culpability here. I would be putting it out there that we potentially forgive the property tax that the municipality would collect, not the education. I think that would be something that, you know, they would have to pay, because I'm not willing to do that one. But I would like council to consider that we do have some ownership in this one, because I have not talked with the people involved in this, just so that we're clear. I don't have any direction given from the church. I don't know anybody there personally. But I am concerned that they just assumed, and I think quite fairly probably, that once that rezoning happened, they thought they had tax exemption. And so, yeah, I bet they were really quite shocked when they got that assessment. Is it like a fair assessment and all that? I have no disagreement with that. I mean, as I said, it is clear in legislation. However, I just go back to the fact that I do think the city owns a little bit of this. I'm not calling out the planning department or anything like that. It's just one of these situations that doesn't happen very often. And you have people that are dealing with, you know, things that are not normal for them day to day. And so they're going to have assumptions, and it's up to us to make sure that we, you know, provide that full service and step them through exactly what it is that, you know, is reached at each milestone and what is achieved and what's yet to happen. So anyways, again, I'm respecting the fact that there is a motion on the floor. I will be voting against that motion because I'd like council to consider what I have just suggested. So.
Thank you. Councilor Gillespie.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I agree with Councilor Gibbs on that. I think the original intent was to bring the two properties together, and the first step was to do the rezoning. And I think it was just an oversight to not have it done immediately. And I think it should be a little bit of shared responsibility on both sides, and I think that to remove the municipal portion of the taxes would be a reasonable compromise.
Anyone else? So we have a motion before us then, brought forward by Councillor Ross to receive the report as information, which would in effect deny the request as it's before us. So I will call the question if there's no further input. All those in favor? Those opposed? So it is split, so that is defeated. And so in this case,
Passed with 3-3.
I know when it's a tie vote, it's
My apologies. Sorry.
defeated, is the way that our bylaws read. Councillor Gibbs?
At the risk of it happening again, I will make the motion. I'm not exactly sure the proper wording, but that we, I don't know, approve a tax exemption for the municipal portion of their tax bill for 2020 year. I need help.
It's on page 4.
Oh, is it?
I don't think that actually was that bad the way you read it the first. Is your intent to make it for the entire year or for just a portion after a certain milestone in the process, or what is your intent, Councillor Gibbs?
Well, I suppose consolidation could occur this year and then they would be tax-free then completely. Is that what the status would be? So then I could say that up to the point of consolidation occurring?
Yes.
Okay. A good point.
Which by effect does remove the entire municipal portion for the year.
But it would also,
Because after it's consolidated, it's not of any kind.
there would remove the school one as well. Though prior to that, they would still be on that.
Right.
Yeah, I suppose, right? I guess I would seek a guidance from admin as to what would be the, what my intention is, how would be the best to.
That would be alternative motion number 3, which indicates that council authorizes the administration to adjust property taxes for the municipal portion of 2020, which would be $977.01.
Honestly, I think that's probably just the easiest to just go with 3 and not muck around with any other caveats. So number 3 as written is my motion.
That was exactly as Manager has. I think for the record, we should probably have you reiterate it.
Actually, okay. I move that council approve the request from Lacombe Evangelical Free Church and authorizes administration to adjust property taxes for the municipal portion of the 2020 taxes owing for the roll number listed.
It just says adjusted by this, we're supposed to understand what that means. Removed. I think your intent was removed, wasn't it? Not to adjust is a little vague, but.
Sure.
Okay. Councillor Ross?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So in a previous presentation of council and request was from another group or organization that we as council deferred the tax collection until June 30th, 2021 as well. Personally, I think that would be more of a compromise to be consistent with prior decisions. So with that in mind, and it's up to, there's a motion on the floor. So, but I think that would be a compromise between the 3 and 3 is a deferral as what we had previously done with another group at a previous council meeting. So, but that it's up to there's a motion on the floor now, so.
Councillor Connick?
So I think it was asked and answered, but I want to be clear again. So they undertaken to consolidate, and that will be all squared away for 2021, it'll be all one person, right?
if consolidation occurs in 2020, before the end of the year, the property would be consolidated and no more taxes would be paid to the municipality in that situation.
That has been
Right now,
perfectly clear to them, so.
my understanding is that they are in the process of consolidating. As I said, I do not know if the process is complete yet. That process is done through land titles. And once the process is complete, land titles communicate with us and we consolidate the two properties for tax
I just want to make sure that we're not doing this again next year. I know this needs to happen. If you want this to be tax exempt, you need to do this.
I think that process has been made painfully clear to those individuals at this point in time. for sure.
Good. That's,
So that is the process as it stands for, and clearly laid out in the MJ that that's how this works, so.
That's my
where we're at. And to the best of your knowledge, it has been applied for at land titles,
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
which is something that there again is not the responsibility of the municipality. It's the responsibility of the property owners, correct?
That's correct.
Councilor Rucha?
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I appreciate what Councillor Ross is saying about precedent, but I think that was a totally different situation. It's not, I agree with what Councillor Hibbs is saying, that we have some responsibility in this mistake, if you will. And whereas in that other case, it was just an open request to have their taxes reduced, and this is a very different situation. So I agree with Councillor Hibbs.
Anyone else? Ms. Balabono, could you read back the motion so that we're all clear on it?
That council approves the further request from Lacombe Evangelical Free Church and authorizes administration to adjust the property taxes for the municipal portion of 2020 taxes owing for the roll number list.
Thank you. We're all clear on the motion? All those in favor? Those opposed? Heartless people. Very good, so that passed 42. Thank you all. So with the indulgence of council, I wanted to get through some items here so that some of our senior staff was able to carry on with their day or evening, however you want to consider it. Wondering if we could consider slight adjustment in agenda order and go down to information down the council mailbox to a letter 6.2.a, given that we have an individual in the gallery who this is of concern to. So unless there's any strong opposition to that, we will continue on with that letter. Chief Kelly, you want to read it in for the...
I certainly can. The letter reads as follows. My name is Alan Lutz. Unless I'm mistaken, Mr. Lutz is with us this evening in the gallery. My concern is that when we received our utilities invoice in the mail on July 14th, we noticed our bill is considerably higher. My wife phoned the city office immediately and voiced concern. We were told to check for leaking toilets. This was done with food coloring and no leaks were present. I went to the city and met with Ashley to voice our concerns. She said they would do an E-code and notify me. After a few days of hearing nothing, I went back into the office and they provided me with the E-code report. It showed a huge jump in water consumption from May 31st until July 18th. They agreed to send Ryan to our residence and look at the meter. He had to adjust the position so it could be read. I had surmised that the problem could be the underground irrigation system and the shut-off valve. And shut the valve off. When he looked at the meter, it showed no flow, therefore problem solved. My concern is that we have a huge water bill and half of the charge is attributable to the wastewater usage. Just as an aside. So this is, of course, as council knows, the city charges for water and then an equal amount for the wastewater. My requested action is that we not be charged for the wastewater portion of the bill, as the water didn't go down the sewer system. Please contact me if more information is needed. I look forward to the opportunity to voice my concerns to city council. Regards, Al Lutz.
Thank you. Any questions or thoughts on this item? Council? I think that both for the public watching at home and for Mr. Lutz here, I think that it's safe to say that we have had several requests during our time in this room over unusual water bills, pretty much all of which have been not denied. I see some peculiar differences in this particular one, in that you've clearly lined out the reasons as to why you think that a portion of it should be exempt, because in fact, that system was not utilized. And I'm just not totally sold in my own mind that just because that's the way that we choose to charge for the wastewater rate, because we don't have any way of metering it, I think that there is some validity in the way that this was put forward, which I'd be the first to admit is unusual for me, because I'm normally not in favor of this. In fact, you're admitting the water went through your meter, there was a problem, you're considering what the problem was. I tend to believe you that in fact that the wastewater portion was not utilized in this particular instance. So interesting to see the additional input that we have. Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Chris. My apologies. So what is the previous presentations we had pertaining to water was obviously, it was identified more as to toilet was, or whatever was the examples before. And I'm sorry, I still don't get quite clear what was the result of the significant water volume in that 5-6 weeks.
I believe it was from the irrigation system that was outlined, so which in fact would mean that the water did not go down the sewer, therefore that's the contention, is that you shouldn't have to pay the wastewater portion of the overall utility.
Okay.
He's not disputing the fact that you use the water.
It wasn't clear to me at the end, it kind of just worded it.
Councillor Richter?
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. This would be a slippery slope in my mind, because I did do some budget consultation things at Music in the Park and whatnot last year. And this was the very complaint from a couple of citizens, is that all the water that they put on their yard, like, so typically they spend so much on water. And then during the spring and summer months when they're watering their yard, they increase their water consumption, but they said they shouldn't have to pay the wastewater piece because again, it doesn't go down into the wastewater. And so if we grant Mr. Lutz this request, then I think we need to honor all the gardeners in our community that will say that all that extra watering they did during the spring, summer, fall didn't go down, wasn't part of the wastewater system. And so I apologize, sir, but I think that would not be, this request would cause us trouble going forward, that people will come forward with, they'll show on their bills, typically we spend this much on water, I'm an avid gardener, so on and so on. So I can't agree with this.
Councillor Kotick?
So as in the previous examples, when we had citizens come with high water bills and the reasons stated, I think I was maybe the only one, but I felt that maybe we should be doing something for them. I agree here as well. I mean, again, we had no idea that this sprinkler system was faulty. Had he known right away, he shut it off on day one, but he didn't until the bill come. And to me, it makes a valid argument that, again, it didn't go into the wastewater system. Yeah, Councillor Luxer, you could argue that for all the gardeners out there, maybe the same thing, but this is, again, a different circumstance than people watering the flowers. Their intent was to water the flowers. His intent was not to have his irrigation system fail. So, to me, I think it's a reasonable compromise, and I would say we should do that for him. I've said that in the other instances as well, that we should be doing something for those homeowners, and that was not met with enthusiasm. So, thank you.
Councillor Dodson?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. What's the dollar figure?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
How can we make a decision?
I can give it to you if you want it.
Yeah, I would like to know.
If you could, please.
My water bill for June was $727.25. And Denise just gave me a prelude of my July bill. It's $514.92, so for a total of $1,250.
What's your average throughout the summers?
But that's your total bill?
My total bill, yes.
So how much is the wastewater
So
portion?
we're only concerned with the wastewater portion.
Well, the wastewater, you guys already know what that is. That's, I think it's half, right?
Very close, yes. There's some minimum fee that's,
Right.
So what's your, when you irrigate your lawn, obviously, you have an irrigation system. So what's your normal water bills, 200?
My water bill, the month before we noticed this was $160.
$160 with watering your lawn with an irrigation system.
Yes,
4 times that.
So when it's like July, June, July, it's similar amounts as been in the past?
well, I would say yes, but to be totally correct, I guess you people would have the information to go back and see what my monthly average is.
Councilor Richter.
Well, thank you, Mayor Christie. I guess that would be, I would rather that we compare July 2020 to July 2019 rather than your previous month, because you probably weren't irrigating tons in June. That would be my one suggestion. And I do appreciate how hard this is, but I just would like to somehow challenge our system at the city that we could flag these situations sooner than we are. Like that's what, because all of them have been, I know it's a time period of 6 weeks or something before the citizen gets to know, but is there not some way we could flag it sooner? That would be what I think we should take responsibility for. Because how can the citizen know if they don't have a bill?
Well, certainly there is methodology in place to have that done, but I think that the $1.1 million investment in the $60,000 to $80,000 to operate it makes it a little unreasonable to expect everyone to pay for the handful of few that have issues. And that's the reason why it wasn't done this far.
That's right. I would also add, I'm not sure that such a system would actually flag this because, well, it was significantly higher, well, 4 times higher than the regular bill. If someone were to sod their front yard, they could see a bill 4 times higher from water effect. So I don't know that it would necessarily catch it, even if a system would, like say they would. A better chance, but not necessarily.
Councilor Ross?
Thank you, Mayor Christie. So comparable to other people that have brought presentations to us was toilet, for example, whatever. So this is really the fault of the irrigation system then. As per other requests for relief, their bill was for other, like, okay, the toilet or whatever the case was. So this one is specific to the irrigation. It was faulty.
Correct.
Okay.
Chief Guy?
So Councilor Hoekstra had mentioned, could there be a better system? And Mayor Creasy, you're absolutely correct. Obviously, the ideal would be that we have a meter on the wastewater line, but that's not feasible on a property by property basis. And so the proxy that's been used to charge is to say 100%. At one time it was 80%, it could be 50%, it could be 130%. But you're right, that ignores the fact that a good part of water usage in the summer does not go down to the wastewater system, whether it's in this case of a high usage or just someone that waters their lawn frequently. That is being sort of by the same logic unfairly charged to all of the residents that are watering their lawn. So I would say there's a little bit of a difference between the faulty toilet and the faulty valve on this irrigation system, because a faulty toilet does result in water actually going down the wastewater system and actually being pumped to Red Deer to be treated, where here the city is not incurring those real costs.
Councilor Hibbs?
Yeah, so just two thoughts. I think that it is important to remember, as Councillor Connick pointed out, that, you know, it's the fault of the valve or whatever, and it's not going down the wastewater. Like it just isn't. It makes it different. I do have a question about comparing bills from one to the other. Having had a automatic system at one time, it does make a difference if you're comparing 1 year to another year. Like, is it automatic? Is it a set like time like frame that it waters? Is it, you know, twice a week for 10 minutes each time? Or is it like manual override? Because those things will make a difference. So you can't really compare year to year. If it was a wetter year, which it was last year, I should hope you probably weren't irrigating. So that would be probably I'm just pointing out the sort of the would not be a fair comparison. There would be some room there. So anyways, I just wanted to mention that. I actually do support the request, so I just want to put that out there.
We have a better memory than I do. We have a motion on the floor, I don't believe that we do.
I just have a question.
Councillor Ross?
So, and thank you, Director. So is it safe to assume, okay, the water transportation is $4 a cube. So if you've increased your bill by $400, it's 100 cubes of water. And if that valve is faulty, can either the frequency of your water system had to be running more, or the faulty valve, wouldn't it be visually apparent that the water had to go somewhere? Like, I'm just trying to say there should be some visual things where, okay, I've got a crap load of water on my lawn or something. Like, sorry, but I'm just comparing costs of a cube of water from the water station's $4 a cube, and your bill went up $400. That's 100 cubes of water. So it's somewhere that water is, even with a leaky valve, it's got to be visually running somewhere, is what I'm trying to say.
So just a minor clarification there. Water at the bulk water fill is around that $4 a cube, but that is partly, it's been doubled to account for the fact that we're not collecting wastewater fees off of it. So at home, when you're buying water, it's about $2 a cube. And so that.
So then it's that much more water.
So that is kind of a similar situation, that when we're selling water to someone for $4 a cube at that fill station, chances are it's not going into our wastewater, it's being used for some sort of industrial system. It still actually is only 100 cubes though, because it's the $2 for water and the $2 for wastewater, so it is still $4 in that sense. It's not to confuse you, but.
Well, I'm just comparing 100 cubes of water when I truck water is 10 truckloads of water.
Yeah.
Councillor Connick?
So I'll put forward a motion that in regards to the request made by Alan Lutz, the council forgive. I'm not going to give you the full percent because you're still flushing the toilet, you're still showering, but I was going to suggest that maybe 80% of the wastewater portion of your bill for June and July be forgiven, if you will, or refunded, or however you want to make that. Is that?
Yep, sure.
Yeah.
Good. Anyone else? We have a motion before us for consideration. It's read by Councillor Connick. I will call for a vote. All those in favor? And those opposed? It is a split decision, therefore it is defeated. Not exactly the outcome that you were hoping for, I expect, but that is the decision this evening. Councillor Connick.
And so in light of that, will we make the same considerations to Mr. Less as we have the other parties that can be paid in installments if needed?
Absolutely. So let's.
Can I mention just, you know, I'm disappointed, but can I mention two other things in my research on this thing? Number one, the existing water meters, I'm willing to bet that 80 to 90% of our ratepayers don't know how they work or how you could even read it if you wanted to check it yourself. In my case, it was installed to a position where even if you did know, you couldn't shine the light on it and wait the amount of time, for it to come off. My second point that I want you to realize is that I didn't realize the meter was in the house. Perhaps my own ignorance and own fault. There still is a meter on the outside of my house. I go and I look at that thing when all of a sudden I get this bill and I see that it isn't running. So I go turn on the water in the house. It isn't running. So I say, well, gee, there has to be something wrong with this meter. Why, when we installed the new meters, did we leave the old meters on the houses to give people, a misunderstanding of what they were looking at?
Well, that's an interesting point, and I think the problem arose is that a lot of people didn't want the holes left in the exterior of the house and the different coloration of the siding. But you're right, the old remote units do not read. You're 100% right there. But I appreciate you mentioning that, and hopefully people watching will pay attention to that. Your first point is well taken. Even if people did realize it, there is very few that would ever care to understand how they work or how to read them anyway. But that's a fair point. So the next item up, Director Duke, thanks for joining us.
And Manager Lapointe will present tonight for this item.
Very good. Item 5.4, Community Economic Development Bylaw. Manager Lapointe, can you take us through that item, please?
Sure can. So good evening, Mayor Creasy and Council. This evening, administration is presenting Bylaw 480, the Community Economic Development Bylaw for second and third reading. Bylaw 359 was approved in 2010 and first introduced the concept of community economic development. While Bylaw 359 explains the community economic development principles, it lacks details on the specifics of delivering on the vision. Additionally, since that bylaw was passed, the city community economic development plan was introduced, along with the ongoing development of an extensive, albeit informal, nonprofit partner network. The new proposed Bylaw 480 summarizes important city community economic development principles and partnerships and their contribution to achieving community goals. It specifically empowers Lacombe Association as the city's nonprofit community economic development agency and enshrines existing funding streams, agreement development, annual reporting, and the city's voting membership on their board as an anchor member. As you probably know, Lacombe offers a range of initiatives, including downtown storefront enhancement program promotion and adjudication, Eco Energy management and promotion, Eco Community Grant promotion and adjudication, management and promotion of the economic development microsite, Lacombe Economic Action Partnership facilitation and coordination, community sponsorships including festivals, social media breakfast, and the new naming sponsorship of the ice complex, support and collaboration in nonprofit community initiatives, and finally training opportunities for local businesses. The Lacombe Association Board is comprised of 3 anchor members from Berman, Lacombe District Chamber of Commerce, and the City of Lacombe, as well as 5 to 7 community members. Board members can serve a maximum of 2 consecutive 3-year terms. I know you had a presentation on this before, so I just thought I'd say in summary, Bylaw 480 enshrines the city's overall community partnership approach as a key factor to community economic development success. These partnerships allow the city to help steer community development initiatives and achieve council strategic goals. This bylaw asks for community groups receiving funding to present annually to council, thereby ensuring alignment with council priorities and strengthening accountability. With that, I'm open to any questions you might have.
Thank you, Manager Lapointe. I don't see any hands up just yet, but I'm sure everybody realized, and I forgot to mention that Councillor Jacobson could not be with us this evening. He was out of the province on business and was unable to make it back on time. He did bring up to me that he had some concerns with this particular bylaw, and wanted me to mention that he felt that if in fact the economic development manager is going to be spending significant amounts of time being the administrative person for this particular board, that it should be included in their job description through HR, and that the ECHO board should reimburse the city for a percentage of those costs, which I think is reasonable. He also wanted me to know that he has put that forward to the board and made that statement rather strongly, he suggested, so worthy of consideration anyway.
Sure, and if I may respond to that, I think the board was open to hearing his suggestions. They didn't feel like we were in a position to take on that responsibility just yet. And part of why we had put forward an annual agreement with ECHO was so that it wasn't contained within the bylaw and we'd have to make changes to the bylaw all the time. So if it was something that wanted to be considered, the council wanted to consider, the suggestion would be that we would put that forward within an agreement that was updated on an annual basis, so we wouldn't have to touch the bylaw.
Chief Gowdy?
So the one thing I would say, we're happy to, actually, the job description, we were reviewing it today in anticipation of this. It is out of date, so it certainly could use an update. The one concern I would have about funding this position or any position out of an arm's length organization is that it does set a little bit of potential expectations about having access to that person's time or being able to direct their activities to a certain degree or have some authority over their priorities. And we wouldn't want to give that impression because, of course, depending on the given week, manageable points time could be partially spent on this, no time spent on this, or 100% spent on this. And we wouldn't want, that would be my one caution. I'm happy to have money coming in to support city positions at any time.
No, and I think that's a fair and reasonable point. I just think that if it does come to the point where it does take up a significant amount of time, that they participate in those costs, and that is a part of the cost of doing business of that particular operation. I see it as being reasonable. Councillor Conick.
Or further to that, they hire somebody on their own to look after that, and matters of the point is simply there as a city liaison kind of thing, so that could.
I think that in time that could possibly go that way, but given that we haven't necessarily even started this up yet, I think that is a little premature to expect that, but in time that could come. Councillor Hoekstra?
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. So when the whole ECHO Lacombe Association part is listed here, then it talks about the funding, and I meant to look at that. The ECHO didn't request any funding last year, did they? Or remind me.
The original request was for $12,000. They reduced that request to $6,000, and that was because they had requested of council to eliminate the requirement to contribute 10% of their earnings into the ECHO Lacombe fund, which is not the ECHO Lacombe fund anymore. It is now the Community Endowment Fund, to avoid any confusion there.
Okay. So is this annual funding piece in here still correct then? Sitting
No,
at 12?
the terms of reference do need to be updated. What I can actually tell you as well is that the Chamber of Commerce is no longer contributing any money. And because of that, we decided to treat Berman the same way. So Berman is no longer contributing any money to ECHO Lacombe at this point as well.
Okay.
So the only money received at this point is $6,000 from the city of Lacombe on an annual basis.
May I follow up?
Certainly.
So tonight we are just looking at the bylaw and those terms of references, that is independent of the bylaw, that if you make like it's
Correct.
correct. Okay, just.
Except that without motion from the bylaw,
I was
We're
just.
not considering much commitment. Councillor Hoopka.
I move that council provide second reading to bylaw 480.
Thank you. Anything else? Makes that easy. I'll ask the call for the vote. All those in favor? Seeing none opposed, that's unanimous. Thank you.
Can I just make one comment before you get to?
Of course you can, Manager Point, go ahead.
I do think that the association is concerned about the capacity of this position being able to continue supporting that organization in the long term. Again, I think because I'm responsible for starting that organization and intimately familiar with how that organization works and with the city, there's definitely a benefit. I think the concern is long-term, they're worried about succession planning. And so that's why they would like to see some sort of agreement in terms of percentage of this position's time there, whether it's compensated or not. They are definitely interested in seeing something in that agreement as well that dictates sort of, a percentage of this time will be dedicated towards the organization. Because if it's not me in this role long-term, they don't know if that'll be sustainable in the long term.
Which is fair enough. Look forward to seeing what administration brings back to us in that regard then. Councillor Connacht.
And further to that, I just find it a little awkward that you're speaking on behalf of it'd be nice if someone from the board were making that request and not you, who's actually the go-between both. So that's.
I'm used to wearing both hats.
My only thought that should really come from that chair of that organization, but any instance.
Fair comment. Councillor Hoopstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy, and just at the risk of sounding really uninformed here, but that agreement is not here tonight, and we're not to draw up an agreement tonight. Is that correct? This is the bylaw.
Correct.
We're just getting messaging about what we could anticipate in the future.
And I believe the bylaw references an agreement that we will establish.
Councillor Hoopstra, are you troubled by the fact that we're voting a bylaw that references a document that does not yet exist, or?
Well, I'm troubled by where does it actually reference it then? Which point?
3.12, I think.
3.1. Operational agreements, okay. Fair, that's okay.
Councillor Hibbs?
I would like to move third reading of the bylaw. We've only done second, so I would move that council provide third reading to bylaw 480.
Thank you. Councillor Connor, or Councillor Coates?
Did we vote on second reading?
We did vote. Passed unanimously.
Okay, I was sleeping. Maybe it wasn't you.
It's so easy to raise your hand on that
I know, I was reading the bylaw, so.
So before us is third and final reading. Any comments before we vote? In that case, all those in favor? Definitely passed unanimously.
We got that one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Manager Lapointe.
But easy on me.
Wait till next time.
And item 5.5, Director Duke is back to us from holidays, ready to do a bunch of great work and consolidate some existing policies into this one. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Good evening, council. Tonight, administration is proposing to council to consolidate 3 current city art policies, which are the percent for art policy, the public art collection policy, and the art exhibitions policy, into a new art development policy, which is presented to you in your agenda package, as well as the existing 3 current policies. Council had directed the consolidation of these 3 policies during its review of the 2 art committees on June 22nd, 2020. And at that meeting, council also directed that the art committee terms of reference be included in the policy. These changes are meant to simplify communication to the public of the city's approach to and support of public arts and the arts community. The 3 art policies were in fact due for routine administrative review, and administration had already sought input from both committees on an earlier draft consolidation. Particular improvements include clearer definitions, very important for administration to manage the portion of the capital projects budgets that was to be provided to purchase and acquire and install public art. Another improvement was the addition of the committee terms of reference, one of which had not been explicitly council approved prior to, which was interesting. Removal of provisions in all the policies that were better suited to an operating procedure or administrative directives, such as how to stage art exhibitions or how and when to hang art. And finally, templating of the policy and the terms of references, which proved to be particularly helpful, I think, in communicating the terms of reference of the committees to the public, since they were repetitive and I think not very clear, but they are now. So with that, I will receive any questions you might have on this consolidation.
Director Duke. See a lot of hands up, so I will start with curiosity with the eligible capital projects at the end. Basically includes capitalized municipal projects, but explicitly excludes roads and necessary appurtenances, but includes trails and sidewalks. I'm just wondering if that is a rather cumbersome accounting method. I mean, basically, sidewalks are considered part of our road system. I'm just wondering if in fact trails and roads ought to be stricken from that group. I think that the bulk of the monies come from the buildings and recreational facilities, sports facilities, and playgrounds. I just don't, I think that the sidewalks are a part of the road systems, and that's the way that we're moving forward to try and include them as one unit. So I think separating those out for the purpose of allotting a rather small portion towards this is unnecessary accounting for very little gain. And trails, I just don't see those as there again. It's such an insignificant amount. Generally speaking, I'm just curious. I think we'd be better off just excluding those. Councilor Ross.
Okay, then I'll go ahead and move this forward. The council approves the new art development policy as amended, as Mayor Creasy has brought out, effective immediately. And I'm assuming that's 2 separate motions. Was anything correct?
You've got it.
I want to be clear on the amendment. The proposed amendment would be to section 5.15, which defines eligible capital projects. And we would remove trails and sidewalks from the first portion and add them. So it would say, but explicitly excluding roads, sidewalks, trails, and their necessary appurtenances. Is that the proposed amendment?
Yes.
I understood.
Thank you.
So is that's good then?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure.
No, I mean, just so Ms. Denise Betloma knows.
Fair enough. Any further discussion or questions? Councilor Connacht.
No, I support the motion as presented. I just want to commend this council and previous council's commitment to art. I think it's an integral part of this community, arts and culture. And I'm really pleased with how we continue that support that was started many, many years ago. And I think it's an integral part of this community. It makes us a diverse, healthy community. And I just want to start out some kudos to Maureen McKenzie, who does tremendous amount of work in this particular area as well.
Thank you for that. Councilor Hoekstra.
I just have a comment on 6.12, the numbering there. Just there isn't a 6.12 1.1. You see it, top of the page? There's on the council policy.
On 6.12,
Oh.
It goes to 6.12.2 and 6.12.3 without having skipped 6.12.1, that is on page 6 of 9.
So as a, appreciate you noticing that. Obviously, there was one that was removed there. If it is of significance, you can bring it back to us. If not, that is just a timekeeping adjustment, so the administration can take care of it. Is that fair enough?
I believe it is a clerical error.
Unless there was some earth shattering thing that was removed, that's number one. We don't need to bring it back. Okay. Anything else on the document? All good? Upset, so put forward the vote then on this item. All those in favor? That was unanimous. Thank you, Director Juke. The second portion of that item 5.5. If someone would care, Councillor Gibbs.
Sure, I would go ahead and make that motion, Councillor, or Mayor Creasy, sorry, that council rescind the existing percent for art policy 78.210.02, public art collection policy 78/210.01, and art exhibitions in public spaces policy 78/148.01.
Thank you. So given that those have been consolidated into the new one, that is an appropriate housekeeping measure. Anybody have anything to add? With respect to that motion, then all those in favor? That was unanimous as well. Next up is the airport lease agreement, the Schedule B amendment, and that is next on your docket as well. Director Jude, please.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So this next item is actually two new documents. One is an amendment number 1 to the airport lease agreement that the city holds with the Lacombe Flying Club. And that amendment is actually to provide for a replaced Schedule B airport operating agreement. The airport operating agreement is part of the lease agreement as a schedule. And because we're amending it, with quite a number of different provisions, we thought replace was probably better than just amend. So there's two documents before you tonight. One is amendment number 1 to the airport lease agreement, and the other one is a new Schedule B. Just off the top, I'll let you know that the Lacombe Airport Committee did review this item and did approve it in its present form. This is the Schedule B that I'm talking about and the amendment number 1. And primarily the change to Schedule B is contained in the highlighted items that I've set up for you. It's in your agenda package. Primarily this is to provide for an incremental increase to the county operating grant amount to allow for CPI, Consumer Price Index. There's a few other changes, primarily to allow some timing for the Flying Club's operating budget and capital budget to be put before the committee for review and approval before they go to councils. And some other clerical items. And lastly, the real substantive change is that there is a provision in here now where the Lacombe Flying Club can put before the committee an option to fund a capital project if it's not already contained in their 10-year capital plan. If it's something that comes up, for example, if a grant is suddenly approved and it comes in the middle of the year, that we can move a project forward and present that to councils and after first going to committee. Other than that, the lease and the airport operating agreement are largely unchanged. And I'll answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Anyone? Councillor Ross?
As advocating for this committee, and there's a lot of positive things happening there with Brownstone Avenue being rebuilt. It opens up opportunity for some commercial opportunities for the airport and other opportunities with each hangar. And I was talking to Director Duke today, the RFP and Stantec will have the information available to go to RFP for the improvement of the runway. And so airport is very fortunate to have a lot of improvements this year. So I'll go ahead and move that council approves amendment number 1 to the airport lease agreement, and it's attached. New Schedule B, airport operating agreement, replacing Schedule B in the original lease agreement.
Thank you. Anyone have any additional questions or concerns? I'll call the question. All those in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Director Duke. Director Thompson. Everybody's favorite subject, item 5.7, sanitary sewer inflow and infiltration reduction plan. We discussed this earlier, and council looks forward to bringing it forward because of the positive financial benefits.
Yes, sir. Hopefully we'll spend a little money to save much more. And so that's the intent of the program that we're presenting tonight. As council is aware and has been made aware that the city's return rate for wastewater is approximately 130%, which means we have 130% of the water that we sell to our customers. We're measuring 130% of that volume in our wastewater system. And so that extra water is coming from somewhere, and it's costing the city a significant amount of money. And so when we try to quantify what those cost savings actually are, we look at if the return rate was closer to 100%, so the amount of water we sold to customers, that volume went through the wastewater system. In 2019, the city would have seen approximately $600,000 in savings. And if that return rate was 90%, instead, we would have seen approximately $814,000 in savings to the wastewater utility. And so those are costs that have really come to light since connecting to the wastewater system, where the city's wastewater volumes are metered and fully known at this point. And so what's before council tonight is a proposal to move forward with trying to narrow down the source of that, or the sources of that extra flow. And it does that in a progressive manner, which I'll provide some highlights tonight. It's important to know or to highlight that this is a medium-term project. It'll take a few years to gather the data that's required in order to build a solid capital plan to actually start to plug the holes, as it were. We need to collect rainwater data. We need to measure the volumes in strategic locations around the city, and that is highly dependent on weather. And so, just so council's aware, the result of this initial phase won't come to fruition for another couple of years. So tonight, I just would like to highlight what the program actually will entail, and then certainly if there's any questions that council has, happy to answer that. So Stantec has proposed the program that's broken down into 3 phases. Tonight, we're asking council to approve phases 1 and 2A. Future phases of 2B and 3 will be brought forward to council for future authorization. Phase 1 entails, it's essentially a planning phase. It entails analyzing the flows, the wastewater flows that go to the wastewater commission. Over the summer, the city of Red Deer has actually asked the wastewater commission to divert flows at the Lacombe lift station to its emergency storage cells on 4 different occasions as a result of significant flows during rain events at the wastewater treatment plant. And we know that the town of Black Falls has a newer system, relatively speaking, compared to Lacombe. Certainly the wastewater commission's pipeline is brand new. And so I guess the only other place where a significant amount of the wastewater from the North Red Deer Wastewater Commission is from the city of Lacombe. And so we want to make sure that the amount of wastewater that is reaching the plant in Red Deer, we want to have a good understanding of what portion of that is actually from the city of Lacombe, what portion of that is from perhaps the other commissions that are connected to the wastewater treatment plant, in order to ensure that the city is not exceeding its allowable volumes that are outlined in the wastewater commission's agreement with the city. And so that's included in phase 1. Another portion of phase 1 will be a diversion study. That's looking at whether it's feasible from a regulatory perspective as well as from an infrastructure perspective to, during major rain events, divert wastewater from the North Red Deer Wastewater Commission to our lagoons in some way, and treat that through either a chemical treatment or through some alternative treatment methods, and then release that into the Wolf Creek at a cost savings. Only because
I think it's important. You had said diverted from the North Red Deer system. So basically, we're diverting it prior to it entering into that system, right? So it's just a small thing, but I don't want people to be under the notion that somehow the major pipeline that extends to Black Falls is somehow being adjusted or changed or whatever to suit this. Okay, thank you.
And the only reason why we want to just think about that is because during major storm events, a significant portion of the water, the material in the wastewater system, would be rainwater, and so it would be diluted wastewater. And administration is actually not thinking this will be approved. Certainly, since just invested in a regional wastewater system, I don't think this would be feasible. But given the potential cost savings, if it was feasible, it's worth asking the questions and seeing if it is possible. And then the final part of phase 1 is planning the micro monitoring system. And so the micro monitoring is actually the backbone of the infiltration or inflow and infiltration program. It involves the installation of special flow monitors in the pipe itself at strategic locations to monitor the flow rates in those specific pipes. And then those monitors are rotated to different sections around the city in order to compare rainfalls to flow rates in the pipe. So if we see a rainfall event and the flow rate in that section of pipe goes up at the same time, then we know upstream of that flow monitor there's something going on. The water is somehow getting into the system, and that data is really important. We have to collect enough data in each of the basins around the city in order to understand, try to narrow down which blocks or which sections or which neighborhoods are the most likely culprits. Phase 2A is essentially that process, rotating those micro monitors to different locations around the city over a period of a couple of years. Again, depending on the weather, depending on how much rainfall we receive in a given summer, in order just to collect the data and then analyze that, narrow down where exactly are we seeing that inflow into our system. And so from there, we'll have some information on where we suspect that inflow is coming from. Phase 2B takes it to the next step of now utilizing different survey methods to try to be more specifically narrow down the location of this inflow to like the block level. So for instance, we may suspect 5 blocks are the culprits. We may wait for a rain event and then do a camera inspection at the same time to see if there's some leaks in the pipe, or if somebody's sewer service is flowing a bunch of rainwater. There might be a cross connection situation happening in that particular block. Or there's also ways to do a pressurized smoke test where you inject smoke into the system, pressurize it, and see if it comes out of the pipe somewhere. There's different methods, and we're holding off on that because it's highly dependent on which areas of town, basically how much we need to. We don't know which sections of town need to be addressed from phase 2A in order to make a recommendation on phase 2B, and so we'll bring that forward at a later date. And then finally, phase 3 is the actual capital programs involved in plugging the holes, as it were, whether it's relining the pipes, whether it's fixing a cross connection issue, or whether it's a full pipe replacement, or some other recommendation in order to address the inflow and infiltration issues. that would come in phase 3, and then dependent on funding at that time, those would be deployed in the city's 10-year capital plan, for instance, over a number of years. And so we're asking council tonight to authorize funding for phase 1 and 2A at a cost of $226,000, funded from the wastewater reserve.
Thank you, Director Thompson. I don't see a lot of hands up, so I will start. I think a logical start to this, the one missing component of this is a communication component that I think would be in order to better inform the public about this issue. I mean, this is a significant issue. We're talking about $1 million a year that is literally down the drain. This is a huge problem. And while I suspect there are some relatively low number of individuals that are doing this knowing full well, by doing this, I mean pumping groundwater through the weeping tile system directly into the sanitary line. I think there's a significant amount more that don't even really realize that they're doing it. The houses have been sold. There was no other option, whatever it may be. But I think we need to start with an education component here to let people know what a serious impact this is having on the bottom line. And also to let them know that in time, there's going to be some serious financial impacts too, should they continue to knowingly do this. Because of the significant financial impacts it has on us. What does the rest of the council think about that? Councillor Gullickson?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I totally agree. I think that they must be made, the public must be made aware of how significant this is. For example, my neighbor's sump pump that hasn't ran in 15 years cut in on the weekend, first time in 15 years. And I know for sure it never came outside. It's never ran, didn't care. It's piped into the drain. And I think that we have a lot of people doing that in our community that are just, they're not aware of the situation, as the mayor explained. And I think that through our farmers markets or coffee with councils, things like that, set up an example of it and explain to them how much volume could possibly going into the system and how much the cost is to the community. And I think if we make people aware of that, they will be I'll be more inclined to be on board with making the changes that are needed. You're not going to get 100% compliance ever, but like my neighbor, for example, if he knew, he wouldn't have it piped into his sewer drain. I mean, it hasn't ran in 15 years, who cares, right? But it's running now with the rain that we've had over the last little while.
And I think just for people to realize how this adds up, I mean, in a, what are we gonna call it, a healthy system, what are we looking at, a 75% return rate, thereabouts?
Typically
80%, okay, fine, 80.
Yeah.
And we're returning 130%. I mean, we're not talking about a few little dribbles here. This is a huge and ongoing problem here that is, yeah, we need to let people know what's going on. Chief Gowdy?
So I think doing a public engagement plan as well sounds like a great idea. It's not part of the Stantec scope of work. That's something we'll do internally with our new communications coordinator. But I think that will have to be a part of this right from phase 1 all the way through to phase 3. And I don't know that we'll get voluntary compliance from people, but even to get the social pressure for people to fix it when their neighbors know they're doing it, it's going to have value. So we're happy to add in a communication strategy, a public engagement strategy with this, not with the Stantec contract, but just separately as part of the project for sure.
It's good to hear, because I think when people understand that this is an ongoing, this isn't like it's fix it once and we save that much every year. This is every year from here on in. Every little bit that we chip away at a fix, this, and it all adds up. Councillor Herbstreit.
2 questions. Director Thompson indicated that we became aware of this when we looked into the regional wastewater system. So this problem obviously existed before. We just didn't have a meter reading on it and there wasn't such a significant cost attached to it. Is that correct?
Correct.
But it did exist. It's not like this is a new thing.
It
No.
just did not happen overnight. That is
Right.
100% correct.
So, and then secondly, we're talking about people's sump pumps and that they're going into their drains. Is that the only source of this extra? Right, and I guess that's what I think is important to note, that that is one. And we don't actually know the other sources, is that correct? Or we speculate?
I would say we don't know a portion of them. We know the types of other sources, but we don't know how much of it is due to this factor.
And what are the types of other sources then?
So one of the things would be water pooling and getting in through manholes or other infrastructure gaps. And then infiltration from groundwater in through pipe joints is another very common.
Anything to add to that, Richard? Councilor Conick?
And further to that, I know there are homes, and I've seen them, where their eaves trough do not go into a downspout or on the grass, they go straight into the ground because they are draining into, again, the stormwater or the sewage system. So, and to my point, if we know we can't upward environment, and you speculated on this, will probably not allow us to do a diversionary plan for lagoons. Why are we going to waste time on that instead? To me, I mean, we should almost be, I mean, it's a lot of grunt work, but you almost need to have somebody go to every house. Like 2 people go to every house in every community, in this community, and knock on the door and say, hey, can I see where yours, you know, I mean, I know it's fairly intrusive and it's difficult, but you're gonna get to the root of the problem pretty quickly, I think, in a lot of instances. Or can I see where your downspouts are going? Can I see where your sump pump is going? I mean, I don't even know if you can do that, but to me, you find in a hurry where a lot of the problem, significant part of the problem.
Director Thompson? Do we have an idea of how much of the community does not have separate wastelands to each residence or to each property, both sanitary and storm?
We do have the information in our databases. I don't have the number, like a percentage on the top of my head. But there are areas certainly within the city of Lacombe that have a sewer system but no storm system. And if those neighborhoods have a roof leader or a roof drain connected underground somewhere, it's probably going into the wastewater system. Or if they have a sump pump that's not pumped to the surface again in those neighborhoods, then it's going somewhere.
You got it?
So I love the effectiveness of a program like that. You're definitely, like I agree, you're definitely gonna catch it. I think we can do some of this pre-work to really narrow down the number of homes we have to go to, because right now you'd be looking at, let's say, around 4,000 to 5,000 homes, an hour each for 2 people. It starts to really add up in terms of manpower. So I think narrowing it down and then deploying them where we know there's some issues, that it's going to be effective for a little bit cheaper.
Councilor Golitsa?
Thank you. Just clarification on the lagoons. They exist now, right? And they're used when we have high flow, right? Is that correct?
No, just certain cells.
Yeah, but the cells that are there that you're talking about using for this, are they there now? They're still existing, right?
So there is small cells right now that we can release into and then drain back into the regional system.
Later on.
But we have no regulatory ability right now to drain into them and then drain them through the other cells to Wolf Creek and ultimately to the Valley River.
Right, because we don't have old agreement is not in place anymore, right?
So that's the issue. We do have some cells that are physically able to store effluent, but right now the only legally available option for us is to then pipe them back to Red Deer, not release them into the creek.
And you don't feel that we would get that approval?
I don't want to say you won't get it. I just, having dealt with Alberta environment for a number of years, I'm not really hopeful right now. I think they will say, no, the system was constructed to end that transfer, interbasement transfer of water, although arguably it's not in this case, but I think there's 30 to 50% chance that they'll approve it. I think it's worth exploring, but I wouldn't say.
Because the majority of it is stormwater,
Yes.
really, it's
Yes.
not sewage, it would be considered sewage.
As soon as a little bit of sewage gets in water, it's considered sewage.
And I know that. I just think that is, and that's the reason that we didn't care for as much, because it just went in and it probably helped our lagoon some. That extra fresh water made them even better. But it's a shame that we can't do that in the interim to balance this out, because it's gonna take us, like this year would have been ideal to test the system with the rains that we've had on a consistent basis. Next year could be a dry year and we don't get any of the results that we're looking for, right? But then we don't have the cost either if it's dry, supposedly. Okay.
Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I really appreciate your comments about a good communication plan, because even if we had success then to start reusing the lagoons, citizens would go, are you kidding me? We paid to get all of our wastewater to go to Red Deer and now we're reusing our lagoons. So if they know the reasons why and that there is a really good communication plan attached to this, then maybe it'll make sense to some people. But I know as a citizen, I'd be sitting there going, what are we doing having two systems? Because that's in essence what will be in place then, right? Two different systems, and all at the cost. I mean, there's a cost now too, but just having said that, I appreciate that comment about communication plan.
I'm just hopeful that there is quite a number of households who will take it upon themselves to take the corrective measures when they understand the impacts of it, because I think there's an awful lot of it that goes on and people don't really think it's that big a deal and don't understand how much water a little tiny sump pump will pump over a period of time. Because we have sump pumps in the city that run 24 hours a day, pretty much all year round, even in the winter months. So it adds up. It's a huge number, a lot of volume. So, Councillor Gallatin.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'll make that motion that council authorizes administration to enter into a professional services contract with Stan Tech Consulting Limited for phase 1 and 2A of the wastewater inflow and infiltration reduction plan at a cost of $226,011 funded from the wastewater reserve.
Thank you for that. Did I take your comments to mean that the communication portion will be done in-house, would be done regardless?
I would say it has been a good reminder to have council speak to the focus on communication on this issue. So I can't say we had, but yes, it will be done regardless of the decision here.
I'm not suggesting that have any bearing on the way I vote on this, but it's important. So. Very good. Any additional input? I will call the vote then. All those in favor? I see none opposed. That's unanimous. Thank you. Director Thompson, would you care to continue on with the patio policy, please?
Certainly can. So before council is a on-street patio policy that we're asking council's endorsement of tonight. This policy was originally presented as a draft policy in 2019, delegating authority or proposing to delegate authority to approve on-street patios to administration. And we presented that to council primarily because of a trigger that we were using to essentially limit the amount of patios that can appear on any one street to if those patios on any given street are taking up 15% or less of the available parking, then as long as they meet all the other conditions, would be approved. And so essentially limiting the parking impact for on-street patios to 15% of the available parking on that street. We have essentially utilized this policy over the course of the year to guide our decisions, and there have been a few more on-street patios, or at least one, Lido's was approved, and they're an on-street patio as well. And so from our perspective, it seems to work. We have converted the policy from its old template to the new template and added a flow chart to provide a visual of the steps that are required in the patio approval process. But we are asking full council's endorsement of that original policy tonight to ratify.
Thank you. Councillor Utrecht?
I move that council approves the on-street patio policy effective August 11th, 2020.
Thank you.
May I follow up with a comment?
Certainly.
I appreciate the flow chart, just saying that. Maybe I'm a visual person, but I like that. So have we had anything like that before?
Local improvement policy.
There we go, very well done.
I did have some comments from the public that questioned why we were doing policy on this now that we had several patios in mind, and I think that we've been very open with this process, and I think to come up with a policy that has reasonable chance of being successful and reflective of council's intention, we had to certainly learn a few things, and hopefully that's been incorporated into this particular document. To come up with one without ever having done a patio, a street patio, I think would be a little unreasonable. Hopefully this suits our community, so I just want people to understand the process and why it perhaps seems to have lagged behind, but it's certainly for a reason, in my opinion, anyway. Councillor Hibbs?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I did have one question from the public about this as well, and they were questioning as to why, for example, if you have a patio set up behind the business, maybe ones that are on Main Street, for example, that those are obviously not, would be not considered under this policy. I'm assuming that's because they fall on private property and then would be under the bylaw 400. I was just wondering if it's possible to expand on what the bylaw 400 route looks like. Is it different from this policy, or is it similar considerations? Because when a business does set up a patio in the back of their building, in the downtown core in particular, it does remove parking spots. Now, they're not public parking spots usually, but they are they are parking spots. And so that person is now displaced, or people are now displaced, and potentially could be taking up another part of it. You know what I mean? So it sort of snowballs. So if possible, just to sort of give a comparison of what that looks like, if it's similar or treated differently.
Sure, yeah, I can absolutely provide that to you. I think because the policy before us, it's kind of step by step exactly what happens on the on-street policy. I actually wouldn't be able to give a similar level of detail on the step-by-step approval process for the patio on private property as described. But I would be happy to follow up with council on an RFI outlining the steps and comparing with these acceptables.
I'm not even sure I necessarily need that level of detail unless you think that that would be better. Maybe we should just do that. But I'm just curious, like if it's similar or if it's quite different, I guess is my basic question.
I would think the big picture steps are similar in that if it requires a discretionary permit, like a development permit, then there's a notification process involved in that. Administration has recently been given authority to use their discretion on variances a little bit more, and so that discretion is kind of reflected in this policy as well, based on feedback it receives from the notification process here. So there's some mirroring of intent there.
Okay.
And so, and then council in both cases are given, or administration is given the option to bring a patio on-street patio application to council if we just felt that it wasn't as clean cut as an approval, or we just felt council needed to get some more context on a particular patio before making a decision. So there are some parallels there between the two approval processes, certainly.
In the case of bylaw, of course, it would go to NPC then in that case, if it was challenged. I guess the only other consideration is it talks about consideration when granting a patio on public, like a public roadway, would be the percentage of parking lots that are, or parking spots that are taken up. And I was wondering if that also is a consideration then when it's in the rear, like I don't see that's an issue right now, but it could potentially be down the road where you have a number of, you know, eating establishments where they all start wanting to have patios in the back, and then how does it work? Because now, again, now you're dealing with the bylaw versus the public policy, yeah, so.
Chief Covey?
So I'm going to attempt to answer the question and look to Director Thompson to jump in if I'm incorrect here. But essentially in the past, patios, the impact of parking, on-site parking would be taken into account. And so if you wanted to get a patio that would reduce your parking and you required an additional variance because of that, you would have to go to MPC and say, this patio changes my variance from 80% in the downtown to 100% variance now. Recently, there was changes to land use bylaw directed by council that removed the requirements for on-site parking in the C1 district. And so although those would still be considered in the patio application, they wouldn't really come into play because essentially there is zero parking requirement on those C1 properties.
Fair enough.
That would be the answer. And I have the land use bylaw up here, so I'm pretty confident that's correct. Jordan, I'm sorry, Director Thompson, what else was doing? Okay.
I would just reiterate I think that's a sufficient answer, and I do not require any additional information, so thank you.
So, fair enough comment. Unfortunately, there are very few downtown businesses that have sufficient parking available, especially at the rear of the building. And I think it was still appropriate that we remove that requirement because it did cause significant delay in permits and whatnot for no changes in outcomes to speak of. So.
No, I appreciate the ability to answer the concerned resident, so thank you.
Did we have the motion read? Mr. Hoekstra read it as recommended, number 1. The council directs administration to award that's why I'm on the wrong sheet. The council approves the on-street patio policy effective August 11th. So just so everyone is on the same page, this is a policy which only requires a single round as opposed to a bylaw which has first, second, and third reading. So with that in mind, does anyone have anything additional? I will call the vote then. All those who approve. That is unanimous as well. Thanks, everyone. And Manager Mitchell will be joining us. Thank you, Amber. Item 5.9, the 2020 Downtown Sidewalk Replacement Contract Award. If you could go through that item for us, please.
Mayor Tracy, before council tonight is a request to award the 2020 Downtown Sidewalk Replacement Program. I do have one correction to make before we get started, and that is in the motion. And the legal name for the low bidder is Raiders Site Services Limited, not Raiders Concrete, as is written in the memo. So my apologies for that oversight. So every year, the Public Works Department reviews and rates the city sidewalk across the city on 5 factors, and that's differential settlements, falling, heaving and sagging, cracking, and accessibility. In previous years, these sidewalks were rated block by block, and each block was given a number based on its average condition. And that allowed administration to kind of go through and prioritize major issues, but it also has some inherent issues with that system. And so blocks that were mostly good condition, but maybe had 1 or 2 sidewalk panels that were in very poor condition, got lumped in, and the sidewalk was maybe rated as fair instead of good. And those very poor panels were not identified. So as a result, before selecting projects, I would go out there and I would review maybe 10 to 15 of the worst projects in the area and then prioritize them based on maybe just 1 or 2 panels on this street and this whole street over here. However, this year, as a part of the asset management initiative that the city has moved forward with, we've moved from Excel spreadsheets to a GIS mapping-based system. And so now we get our sidewalk inspectors out there and they can rate on a 10-meter section, a single panel, or an entire city block. And so when they walk through, they can take pictures of the worst issues on the sidewalk and upload them as they're going along. It just takes seconds. This is very cool. So I did include for you guys figure 1, which shows an example of the data collected. And you can see here, this is 49th Ave, which is one of the projects we've proposed for this year. And on the south side of 49th Ave, you can see a whole bunch of orange dots. And in this case, the orange represents poor condition. On the north side, you see much fewer green dots. That's because walking along that sidewalk, there's nothing to stop and take a picture of. And so they maybe stopped every 20 or 50 meters and just said, hey, yeah, it's still good. Yeah, it's still good. And so we're very excited about this new process because it makes it a whole lot easier for me. And it also highlights those areas where there's a red condition. And those are often safety hazards, they're tripping points or those kind of things. And so when we highlight those as red, that means it's typically 1 to 2 panels. Public Works can go out and they can fix them on their own as they occur, as they're identified, and we can record them in the GIS system. So this year, administration selected 3 projects, and we elected to select projects that were away from the downtown businesses. And this was done for 2 reasons. The first is that construction would result in reduced access and parking for several weeks. And we didn't want to impact businesses that had already had significant impacts due to the results of COVID-19 closures. And the second reason is that council has set aside funds for downtown area re-improvement projects, which have not yet been selected. So there's going to be $1.7 million over 10 years. And those projects could be a wide variety of things that might include street lighting or sidewalk widening, sidewalk aesthetic improvements. And if we went ahead and just replaced the sidewalk with typical sidewalk, that might knock a high priority project for the community out or result in significant rework. So the sidewalks we did select for this year include the south side of 49th Ave from 57th Street to CNE Trail. And in figure 2, you can kind of see the projects here. And that is a separate sidewalk. So we will be replacing the whole one along there. And it has significant drainage issues on that sidewalk, which cause severe icing, especially in the spring and fall. And then the other 2 areas are the north side of 54th Ave between 51st Street and 52nd Street, and the east side of 52nd Street between 49A and 49th Ave. So the request for tender for this project was advertised on Alberta Purchasing Connection and in the paper. The tender closed on July 28th and the city received 5 bids, but only 4 were deemed eligible due to the failure of one of the bidders to acknowledge an addendum which contained a modified bid sheet. The bid results are summarized in table 1. Raider Site Services was the lowest bidder, and the next highest bidder was approximately 23% higher. Raiders completed the sidewalk replacement program for us last year, and they have successfully completed several other projects here in the city, so I have no hesitation in recommending them to complete the work this year. This project was tendered based on unit rates, so per meter of sidewalk replaced, with the intention to adjust the quantities in the field to exceed it did not, or to ensure that it does not exceed the budgeted value of $104,239. Since the tender did come in lower than anticipated, the quantities on, and in particular on 54th Ave, so in front of the schools, will be adjusted and increased so that we can address more of the deficient panels in that area. So once again, the motion before council should read Raider Site Services, not Raiders Concrete, and I'll take any questions.
Appreciate that, Manager Mitchell. I realize there were some adjustments with the consideration of businesses down there. Was there any areas that were omitted because of the overall expected dollar amount? Is there some areas that are not being done that, in your opinion, ought to be? Is that it's a very severe, that fall into a significant severity category?
Outside of the ones specific to the downtown area, there's always the next worst ones on the list. And so we figured these 3 areas we could address, and they would exhaust the majority of the project budget. So no, we didn't. We did identify some within the downtown area, and there was a ways there when we were trying to wait to see how long those closures would happen, because that would have been an ideal time to do sidewalk replacement. But unfortunately, the frost was not out of the ground until mid-May, and by the time we tendered and closed a project, businesses were restarting and reopening, and the timing didn't work. So those ones were thrown out. The next, I would say the next worst ones do impact businesses. And so depending on the projects that are selected for DARP, they will be targeted next year if they're not impacting the projects selected for DARP.
That was more of the ones in the periphery of the downtown core that these kind of address. Are there any in there that are not being done that fall into a similar category? That's what I was getting at.
Yes.
I realize over the whole city there's
definitely some. So the area in front of Lido's would probably fall into a similar category, where you're going to see a lot of orange on that section of sidewalk. And that was one that if we were doing a downtown project, it would have been on the list. And then the other one that was on the list for consideration was the remainder of 50th Street. And that one is not so much falling on the list for safety reasons. That's more because we did half of it before, and aesthetically, there's not the match there. And it's in, should have gotten you a picture of that one too, but you'll see there's one orange dot there, and then the rest are yellow and green. So it's not nearly as bad a condition as some of the ones that were selected for this year's program.
And so specifically with the first one that you would reference at Lido's, is that to the south of where the alley entrance and to the east from there?
That's kind of between the two parking zones. So no, it's directly in front of Lido's. There is like a parking lot, and then there's a boulevard and several trees that have caused some upheaval on the sidewalk panels along there.
Thank you. Councillor Connor.
So a couple questions. So in terms of one panels, we do a lot of that in-house, though, right? Like that'll still be addressed. This is just major stretches that we're trying to address with this, correct?
Definitely. And then if our roads team is busy with multiple other things that year, I always sit down and talk with Brett and say, hey, are there a couple that you need us to take on as part of this project? Especially if they're safety hazards and we don't have capacity in-house to do it, we can do it as part of this program.
And my second question was, what did you say about 54th Ave? Did you say there's monies to maybe extend it? Are you talking to the west?
So 54th Ave, we had initially just identified selective panel replacement. So it was not a long stretch. It was this panel's really bad, this panel's really bad, that panel's really bad. With the extra available funds, we can say, okay, this one that is in poor condition but not a tripping hazard, we can address it as well at the same time.
Oh, I see. So you're not going to extend further in front of Father Lacombe School?
Correct. Well, that is the section in front of Father Lacombe. It's in front of the elementary school and Father Lacombe.
Oh, because it kind of, when I look at the map, it kind of stops.
Archway, yeah. We might extend it a little bit further past that. I suspect those trees may cause some issues, just looking at the aerial photo. But
And the only reason I bring it up is that Councillor Hibbs can talk about this too. Of course, they're talking about doing a major rebuild there. And one of the things they've suggested is kind of a drop-off roundabout thing. So I hate to see us replace the sidewalk when 2 years down the road that could be all ripped up because they're going to do something very different there. That's all, and I don't know the details, I'm just speculating. That's why I would hesitate to actually go further in front of Father Lacombe, because I know there are changes coming, fingers crossed. These government plans for schools kind of fluctuate, yes they're in, then they're not, so it's, anyway, that's all I was saying.
no, that's a very good point. We'll definitely take that into account, and potentially if there's a hazardous panel, we might still elect to replace that one if they're passable.
But if in fact the school does confirm that they have some other alternate plans in force, then we can expect the entire thing will not be replaced at this time?
Correct.
Okay. Because that would look very bad and be a complete waste of money. So, okay, very good.
Yeah.
Councillor Ross?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'll make the motion that council direct administration to award the 2020 downtown sidewalk replacement program contract to Raiders.
Site services.
Sorry, site services for an upset limit of $104,239.
Thank you. Any additional input on downtown sidewalks? We'll call the vote then. All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, that was unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you, Manager Mitchell. So the next item, Chief Gowdy, Council Committee appointments. I know there was more than what we had in mind, and they've been brought back for a variety of reasons. So the ones that are remaining, if we go through them, please.
The purpose of this request for council decision is to fill 2020 vacancies for citizens at large on the Lacombe Art Collection Committee, Lacombe Arts Endowment Committee, the City of Lacombe Library Board. And we had hoped to have a couple more, but of course, as you know, Mayor Christie didn't quite get completed before the meeting, so you'll see some more at the next meeting. Today, we are recommending the approval of Stacey Thompson to the Lacombe Art Collection Committee with a term ending August 11th, 2023. We're recommending the reappointment of Brent Balsama to the Lacombe Art Collection Committee with a term expiring December 31st, 2020. Recommending the reappointment of Ellen Correa to the Lacombe Arts Endowment Committee with a term expiring December 31st, 2020. And the recommendation of the reappointment of Amira Giesbrecht to the Lacombe and District Recreation, Arts and Culture Board as the student representative with a term expiring August 31st, 2021. With respect to motions number 2 and 3, these are actually variances to the former terms of reference for those boards that have now been reintegrated into the consolidated arts policy. With those changes, we had some extensions that actually shouldn't have happened. And so by extending these to the end of December 31st, we're still acknowledging the contribution of the appointees who have been working on those boards and making sure that they are transitioned back to alignment with the terms of reference. So that's why the rather short deadlines of December 31st is just to make sure that we are getting back in alignment with the new terms of reference contained in our policy as soon as possible.
That's my question.
I was going to say, if you're looking for someone to blame, you can blame me, because I suggested that we take this route as opposed to making odd part-year appointments for new individuals. We're not out to, I guess, dissuade people from being involved in these boards and commissions and whatnot. So I think that's a far more equitable thing to see them through and let them finish up their year in appreciation of the work that they do in our community. So I think it was a good route under the circumstances. So thank you for those adjustments. I also want to remind council that it's certainly appreciated when you come up with names of individuals that you would suggest for the various positions we have to volunteer in our community. I want to thank Councillor Jacobs, and even though he isn't here, for putting forward a name for the Arts Inspection Committee, and expect that his recommendation, the individual he brought forward, will do a wonderful job. So it was appreciated. Care to make a motion? Councillor Hoekstra.
I move that council approve the appointment of Stacey Thompson to the Lacombe Art Collection Committee with a term ending August 11th, 2023.
Thank you. Any input? All those in favor? Thank you. Councillor Connick.
Also move that council reappoint Brent Balsamo to the Lacombe Art Collection Committee with a term expiring December 31st, 2020.
Thank you. Any input? All those in favor? Unanimous, thank you. Councillor Gulletson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'll move that council reappoint Ellen Correa to the Lacombe Arts Endowment Committee with a term expiring December 31st, 2020.
Thank you. Once again, any additional input? All those in favor? Very good, thank you.
No, one more.
Not unless somebody raises their hand, or isn't it? Councillor Hoekstra.
That council appoint Amira Giesbrecht to the Lacombe and District Recreation Parks and Culture Board as a student representative with a term expiring August 31st, 2021.
Thank you. Any input on that individual? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? That is unanimous as well. Thanks, everyone. I believe that was all the requests for decision. So we will move into the remaining items under number 6, information, and begin with our CAO's report.
So I'm happy to report that our recreational facilities are operating under a modified program. So far, we are seeing people make use of the facilities, and they're sort of breaking even, but they never did. So I'm pleasantly surprised actually by the amount of value our community must be getting out of it, out of the reopened facilities. I want to report the receipt of $60,000 of grant funding for fire services review, which is underway. Shay was looking after that. And we are, of course, preparing for budget preparations for council, which August 17th is your preliminary discussion of budget deliberations. And we are working to develop a menu of options for the recently announced municipal stimulus program, which as well will give you a first glance on the 17th. Of course, that's a committee meeting, as is your 30th meeting. So you'll see and be able to debate some projects that we're putting forward, but you won't be able to make the official decision until September 14th. And we do need a decision that day because the funding has to be committed by October 1st. So if you don't make the decision September 14th, you will have one more meeting on the 24th that you can look at. And beyond that, actually the province has indicated that any funding not committed by October 1st is at risk of being reallocated to different communities. So it will be a little bit of a rushed decision, but that's why we're putting together some options of things that you've seen before and that we suspect council will have a lot of support for.
Chief County and I have had an opportunity to go through some of those, and I want to let you know that I am confident the council will come up with decisions, however they may be, and have them in time to make use of the appropriate funds.
Which are, I should mention, $1,662,000 and about $300. But if you just 1.6 million, that's the sort of range we're looking at, and we do have some good options for that.
Councillor Connick?
I just had a couple questions, not so much anything directly in your report, but just a little bit to, for example, I submitted a citizen request inquiring about the yield signs behind the fire hall. And you said the response was that would be looked at this summer.
Yes.
And then there was Councillor Hibbs, for example, that went up on CME where Woodland, or sorry, Airport Road crosses and turns into Elizabeth.
Yes.
So you put forth a solution, you said that would take place this summer. 30 days later, nothing has happened. So I'm just wondering if we just you can give it time or I missed the you might.
So I don't know. Did we say we would do something by this summer for the Woodland Drive?
I can bring it up.
Perhaps Director Thompson might have.
Director Thompson?
Sure. So the two were kind of behind the fire hall, and we wanted to make sure that, so the issue was the aerial fire truck, when it leaves the fire hall, it has to navigate around, or used to have to navigate around the yield sign that was at the south end of the block. And with the changes to parking, to add more parking on 52nd Street, flipping the parking stalls from parallel parking to perpendicular parking, the aerial truck could no longer make that turn without impacting that yield sign.
Right.
And so if we were to flip them back, we certainly would have some amount of impact to parking to provide that, to allow that aerial truck to make that turn. So we have actually gone out with the fire chief and put a cone down where the yield sign would go, and really made sure which parking stalls would be impacted, and it's 2. So we will remove 2 parking stalls in order to facilitate that change back. But that's what needed to happen before we actually made the change. And so the sign is scheduled to be flipped back, and so it's as soon as our crews have that in the queue. They are still in their offset schedules, and so it will get done. The other one is the Airport Road and Elizabeth Lake Drive.
Yes.
And that one, we said we would do that, make some changes there with some line paint and adjust the signage. When the frost lens work was happening at the same time, there's that bump in the winter that we're doing some underground work on the north end of that intersection. And so when that is happening, we'll make the change to that intersection at that time as well.
Okay, and that's fine.
It hasn't happened yet, but it is fine.
It just references this summer, and summer's rapidly disappearing, so.
The summer just started, my friend. September 22nd is the summer.
But I was just curious as to what, thank you, you answered that. I just was curious where in the queue, because it's still, as Councilor Hicks, there's been too many near misses there, so the sooner we can get those stops, anyways, that's great.
So the repair to the frost lens was along Memorial Drive, or Memorial Way, or whatever it's called, yeah, correct? You had referenced.
Scenic
trail. No, you called it something else. I just want to make sure that that's the same area we're talking about, scenic trail.
63rd
Memorial Trail, whatever you want.
Yes.
When's that?
Okay, Councilor Hoekstra?
Thanks, Creasy. I just had a question about budget preparation. What are we speculating CPI to be at?
So we don't need to speculate. It is at 1.6%. We have the Alberta CPI direction. What we're looking to hear on the 17th, of course, is if council wants to proceed with your annual taxation and budget preparation policy to target CPI, or if there's a desire to target a different number.
Okay.
So we'll be bringing that forward. They were a little bit late actually coming out with it this year, and so we were waiting, but just in the last couple of weeks it came up.
Thank you.
Did that conclude your report?
Yes.
Very good. Nothing additional on CEO's report?
Oh, I'm sorry, but there was one other thing I wanted to highlight. We did complete our preliminary survey of Elizabeth Lake, and we have found that the water levels there have risen to such a degree that there's significant impacts to the city's environmental reserve, and that in some places the entire environmental reserve may be underwater, which could impact the way we approach the Elizabeth Lake trail upgrade, or even in some sections, your ability to do so without spending a really undefensible amount of money to make it happen. So we are still looking at that, but just so you're aware, we have got some sort of not that unexpected, but certainly undesirable results from the survey, that the city's land holdings have been greatly impacted around that lake.
So one question that I had in the past was with respect to water levels on those water bodies. Have we taken some shots on that to see where that is at?
Yes.
And what were the results?
In terms of one lake's level to another, Cranda and Elizabeth.
Correct.
Of course. Do you have the exact difference with you? But essentially, it's still right now, if you were able to stabilize them, Cranda Lake is actually higher than Elizabeth and Ann. And so if you were to stabilize them, they would stabilize higher than they're at today. And so it would actually make the problem worse. I don't know the exact distance. At one time it was about 14 inches, but that the trails are quite a bit more impacted than they were at that time. So I would suspect it's quite a bit less than that.
Very good, thank you.
So Elizabeth to Barnett Lake is, you know, those numbers?
That I don't know, no. Jordan, do you know, or sorry, Director Thompson, did they look at that at all? Set those elevations?
Because they're flooded just as bad. It seems like all the trees are dying all the way around that lake and the slough to the west of that.
I'm sorry, I don't have that, that information in front of me, but I can follow up and get that answer for you.
Looks like that's it for questions for you. Thank you. We went through the council mailbox for item A, B, the EMS dispatch consolidation municipal notification from August 4th. Unfortunately, Patricia isn't here. Was there anything you wanted to add to that, Chief Cody?
No, there wasn't. I saw that the city of Red Deer has expressed some great concern about the loss of their dispatch. I'm not sure that we would have the same impact since we're already being remotely dispatched. Some of the issues we have with police were being dispatched out of Red Deer. On the other hand, we get dispatched fire out of Red Deer, it's okay.
Our EMS currently for this area has been dispatched out of Red Deer, and then so I think Red Deer, Lethbridge, other communities have collaborated together, tried to oppose it, but that's been in place as the plan for like 10 years. So they've deferred it several times already.
Move on to the assessment model changes, a letter that was received from the Lacombe County. Pleasure with meeting with Reed Law to discuss some of these items, and certainly any time that there is impacts to one of our partners, it's of concern to us. And I think there's some unintended impacts to our operations as well. There could be. Chief Cody, what would you like to add to this item?
So the letter, if you read, it really points to the potential impact to the city's education requisition and the affordable housing requisition. But when we looked at the supporting documentation, it's fairly nominal. It's in the $5,000 kind of range. I think that the bigger impact is to the viability of our surrounding parkland. And so some of the concerns I have heard from administratively from them is that not only is this going to affect their viability immediately, that it's seen as a precursor to a similar approach to the machinery and equipment tax model, of which Lacombe County is a significant beneficiary because of some of the petrochemical plants in the county. And so I would say that the concern for Lacombe County is very real. It's this significant change to their tax model that could arise, and they've asked for a letter in support of this position that would go to the MLA. Because of the magnitude of this change, we re-uploaded the agenda, which I'm sure you're aware, to try to get this into this mailbox in case council would like to provide some direction. Because again, your next meeting where you're going to provide direction is actually September 14th. So if you did want to provide us to create a letter of endorsing these concerns, we would receive that tonight, and I would work with the mayor to make sure that this forwarded on to the MLA as requested.
Well, I think given the county did approach us and very suggested that they would appreciate some support in this matter. I think that that's all that it takes is to get a letter that, given our good relationship with them, I would suggest that we try and help them out as best we can. The dollar amount may not be significant yet, but I think, as you suggested, with the possibility of this somehow extending into the machinery and equipment item, that would be extremely impactful to everyone in the area through the county. So I would like to perhaps one of council's direct administration to work on developing a of support on this item. I don't think that it's going to do them much good to receive it after the September meeting, so time is of the essence here. If someone would see fit to move that forward, I would certainly appreciate it. Councilor Lucia?
I move that we direct administration to write a letter of support for the county regarding the impacts of the assessment model changes.
Thank you. Any additional input on that item? All those in favor? Appreciate that, thank you.
Not opposed.
I am sorry, I thought that was unanimous. Opposition, or those opposed? So noted. Thank you, Councilor Ross. My apologies for missing out on the first vote. Item 6.3, the 10-year plan for the art collection, letter received there, and the art collection committee minutes. Any questions, concerns with either of those? After that, we've got a couple of MPC minutes that if there's any questions, I'm sure that Councilor Hibbs or myself can go over. Seeing none, I'll move on to council reports. Councilor Lucia?
No, nothing to.
Councilor Ross?
Nothing to add.
Councilor Wilson? Councilor Connick? Councilor Hibbs?
Councilor reports?
Yes.
I just wanted to bring attention to, of course, my report's attached, but I did bring in actually the guide that I was talking about in my little write-up. And I just wanted to be able to show you like what it actually looks like. If you want to have a look at it, perhaps after the meeting you can. I was really impressed, like this is really, it's broad scope. It has everything from elder abuse to like a stress checklist. Like it's really thinking about the person that has dementia as well as the person, you know, the caregiver, because there's often a caregiver, not always though. And as you can imagine, especially if you're say newly diagnosed with something like that, it can be overwhelming, and you don't know where to go. You don't know what resources are available, and it actually turns out that there is a fair amount available. It's just you may not be aware of them. So this is a new group. Some of you did attend that initial presentation. They're really running with it. They will be looking for some support from the city. When I say support, I don't necessarily mean financial, although I don't know what that looks like. But they certainly want us to be aware of them and try to work with them. And as I did share in my report, they are interested in that social plan, master plan that we are working on. So that just happened to be the right time, I think, to connect the two parties. So yeah, like this is quite promising, I think, for our community. A lot of the goals and intentions that they have will obviously benefit those that have dementia and their caregivers, but also will just make this a better community. And of course, we do have a significant, now typically dementia is an older person type of situation, but it isn't limited to exactly that. So, but that is something that's in our community, and we have a significant population that is vulnerable to that happening to them. So I'm pretty excited about this. So I will keep you up to date on the next steps if there's anything to report. But I do encourage you to have a look at this resource after our meeting.
Thanks, Councillor. That concludes the council reports. I don't have one either at this time. Our minutes from, actually, we might as well do the information separately. I guess we normally do that, don't we? Councillor Lucia?
I move that we accept the information as information.
Thank you. All those in favor? Unanimous, thank you. So item 7, our minutes from our last regular council meeting, which was July 13th. Any errors or omissions there? Did anyone notice? Councilor Hibbs.
I'll move that they be accepted as presented.
Thank you. Didn't see anybody with any objections or changes, so I'll call the question and all those in favor. Unanimous, thank you. And notices of motion, item 8.1. Councillor Lutz, would you care to read your?
Thank you, Mr. Creasy. I move that council direct administration to prepare information regarding the cost of an electronic sign similar to that included in council's mailbox on July 13th, 2020 for consideration during the 2021 budget process.
Thank you. Chief Cuddy.
The one thing we would ask administratively when we looked at this was we just want to have a clear view of the service that would be provided after the fact. We're quite confident that we can get fairly solid prices on the capital cost of the sign and installation of the sign. But it's the view of the operating service that will have a big impact on our operations. So the question, sort of the two visions we have thought of is either, is it a sort of community messaging sign where maybe for an hour a day, someone's updating to make sure that the messaging is accurate and it's about the latest events in the city? Or is it an advertising revenue stream service where we are soliciting advertising and making sure that advertising is shown at the right level? And is that revenue, if that's the model, is that revenue for the city, or is that something that's accessed or distributed to the groups using that facility? So is that revenue stream something that would offset the operational cost when we're looking at those costs, or is it both? Is it a community message and advertising? And so that was the only question, is kind of like what the service would look like once the sign is in place. Is it Lacombe Ford's a bad example because they're very one thing. Is it advertising Booster Juice, or is it advertising Lacombe Days that's happening?
You want me to speak to it? I want to. Okay. All right. Well, I would say that's difficult to say. It depends on your funding model, because there's an opportunity to pay for the sign with the advertising. And there's going to be some advertising, like right now we support Bolt with advertising on the bus stops, and that's coming to an end. So there may be some opportunities for that advertising group to move to something different. And this might be that location. And I guess it depends on the cost of the sign, what your models need to be, whether you need to have advertising to support the sign cost, or is it just a community-based sign? And that would be a decision that would have to be made once we know the cost of the sign and whether we want to have advertising on it or not. And the one advantage to this sign would be that, for example, we would say probably 2 signs that we rent now for different activities that the city puts on or has going on. I think we have a couple signs rented on a monthly basis, and that could be covered off by this sign. And certainly for our user groups at the arena, especially like the pool, for example, all of their activities would be on there. The minor hockey, figure skating, the curling rink, all of those user groups would be able to facilitate that sign. Now, whether you look to them to support the sign financially, because now they're not renting signs to promote their activities, because they certainly do that. There's a sign oftentimes out in front of the arena promoting something that's happening at the pool or within the facility. So I think that to look at that model is premature, because you don't know whether you need to have advertising, how much advertising needs to be on that to help support the sign.
So just for some further clarification, is the intent of this sign to have city forces operate the sign? Update it and...
From what I understand, I thought it would be more extensive than it is, but I understand it can be done probably within an hour a day. would be enough to support the sign. And that would be changing it for, like, if a nonprofit group submitted something for the sign, for example, an activity like Lacombe Days had something on there, that would take, those changes would average an hour a day. So cost-wise, it shouldn't be too expensive. Now, there's some creative things that can be done. And with the sign that was presented, I understand that it has some options that can get very creative and, be, little advertisements, little videos on there, things like that, that may be more extensive, but they do provide the training with that, with the cost of the sign.
Right.
To operate it.
But who is it that's doing the sign? Who is it that's building it? Who is it that's doing the administration of it? Is it the curling club? Is it the city of Lacombe? Is it minor hockey? Who?
Well, it would be the city of Lacombe in this case, unless you want to contract that out, which could be done based on advertising. If you wanted to do that, you could pay for that through advertising on the sign. Then you could contract that out to somebody else, and then they would put the activities on the sign for the user groups or whoever's, or the city of Lacombe, which I think will be the largest user of the sign, I would hope, to advertise things that are happening within the city that we're doing, safety measures, COVID-19 updates, things like that, could all go on that sign. The other users that would be, I think, would be very interested in the sign would be the schools, the location, and the ability of that sign to put out messages at certain times of day. For example, you could have the sign put out a message from 8 until 9 o'clock that's for the schools, when the students are going there, the parents and so on. And then switch over to the other activities after that, like the city messaging, things like that. So you could actually set it up to try and meet your user groups by the time frames. So there's some unique, I think, things with this sign that can be done. The main thing about this is that all we're looking for here with this notice of motion is to find out what the actual cost of the sign would be and whether we can actually make an informed decision whether we want to go ahead with it.
Councillor Oosthoek?
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I expressed a comment in this regard in the past. Why do we want to compete with the chamber in terms of a community sign? Especially because, I guess I'm not sure where the new chamber sign is ending up being relocated to. Do we know now?
It's been moved already.
Yeah, very, very similar.
Same.
A little ways west, Highway 12. And that's one of the things about that location is they have a lot of vehicles per day.
Right.
Which advertising benefits from.
Right.
So the community messaging.
Yeah.
Are, right, the advertising.
Okay, so then I guess then my next question is what precipitated the need of this sign? Like, I'm curious because I just checked the chamber sign, the new sign costs about $26,000. Yeah, it's pouring. And so why are what precipitated the need of this sign?
Well, I think, the sign has been asked for specifically by the user groups of the arena more than anything else, because that's the ones that would benefit the most. There's no doubt about that. But other community groups in town, for example, our Rotary Club would benefit from that when we put on events, Kinsmen, Lions, any of those community groups would be able to use it, similar to the one in Pinoca. And I think if you go to other communities, you see these signs all the time that are being used by these groups and getting their messages out. And I think we're a little bit behind the times by not having them. It also would let everybody know that what's at our arena, because right now you don't know. And for the city, any of our activities that we wanted to put on signage would be on that sign. Emergency things, promotional things, all kinds of Lacombe days, all of those things would be on that sign.
So just to be clear, then this is only to prepare cost estimate for the implementation for the installation, correct?
Yes.
Perhaps,
Not the operational. Okay.
so
Because it,
that's not too onerous a task then to secure some
No
price on
problem
this.
at all. Yes.
Councillor Conick?
Well, just, we're kind of debating on this motion too, right? Further, I would argue we need to know the operating costs. I'm not gonna commit, I don't wanna commit the city to $80,000 on a sign when the cost is 20 to operate. So contrary to Councilor Douglas, I think we need to know what the cost to operate it, who's doing it, as well as the capital cost. Because there's no point, I'm not gonna vote for something, if I don't know what the cost to operate. Because every time we build a new building, it's not the cost of the building, it's the cost to operate it that kills us in the long run. Or like kills us, but that's what you're saying. So
are we talking about the cost, are we talking about the $80,000 for the sign here? I don't believe we are.
No, I'm just saying, I'm throwing out a number. I'm just saying, I don't want to commit, I can't commit to a cost for a capital project. I don't know what it costs to operate.
Right, and that's why we need to know what the costs are.
Right, you just said you're just looking for capital costs here. I want capital and operating.
Well, like as far as the sign, we need to decide, okay, if you want to have operational costs, you said an hour a day. And that's a rough estimate, an hour a day. I mean, really, to me, that's not a good estimate. That tells us nothing. But that's the number that was thrown out that it would take to operate the sign, an hour a day. Does that tell you anything? I don't.
That doesn't tell me anything, that's what I'm saying.
No,
So
exactly.
I'm not gonna vote to approve this sign if I don't know what it costs.
Are you voting to approve the sign today?
No, that comes in the notice of motion. But I'm just saying, you need.
Really? That you're voting to approve the sign and the notice of motion? What does
It's
it
the
notice?
prepared information cost of an electronic sign, and that's what we're saying, is it just cap? I'm saying it needs to be capital and operating. That's my.
Chief Gotti?
Does it say capital
Would
here?
hang on, would it be reasonable to put together some sort of operational cost along with the cost of the physical side?
Yeah, I'm thinking that if this motion passes, what we would be looking to do is first we'll reach out, get that capital cost. That is the one that I think we can get quite easily. We'll find out that from that we can get a lifespan and look at the depreciation of the asset, and on the electricity that it'll use is probably quite well defined. And then we'll just use that basis of an hour a day for a person, and I'm basing that on sort of a scenario of community events and community messaging signage for our community groups. And I think we will, maybe we'll try and do a discussion and some estimates on what it would look like if we were to include some advertising side, and we might need to talk to the chamber, I guess, to find out. I don't know how we
Very good, and it's a reasonable expectation to have this all in order for our budgetary process then, as outlined in the motion.
I don't think for the 17th meeting, because that is right, but for your budgetary proceedings in October, I think we can have something to do well before that, so that you can give us some direction.
I think that clarifies things as much as we need to at this point. Unless anybody has anything further that they wanted to go through. So with respect to the notice of motion then?
Yes.
So as stated by Councillor Gluckson, under notice of motion then, I will call for the vote. All those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. And actually, we have to do the in-camera yet, but I think prior to doing that, we will go through our next meetings as outlined by Chief Gowdy on August 17th. Will be a committee meeting focusing on budget. Provided we haven't floated away by then, judging by the noise of the rain on the roof here. Then Monday, August 31st, we have an additional council committee meeting for a similar purpose.
Actually,
Or is it something else for that?
that is to have an open and free-flowing discussion on possible future uses of the Parkland Regional Library after, or the former building of the Parkland Regional Library after a tour.
Oh, right, that's tour day. Very good. Thank you. And then a regular meeting on September 14th. So if you could add those to your calendars, please. And I don't believe that we've looked over anything other than section 9 at this time. So I'm looking to you for a motion. Councillor Hoekstra.
I move that we move in camera.
Thank you. It is now 7:55, and we will move to in camera after a 10-minute break. So at 8:05, we will resume in camera.